Hi guys. Tonight we step quietly into a world where the cold already knows your name. You're standing in knee-deep snow boot-soaked breath, fogging the air as a small log cabin crouches ahead of you, like an animal bracing for impact. The sky is low and white, the kind that promises nothing good. Wind slides across the clearing and finds every gap in your clothing. You probably will not survive this without help, skill, and a little luck, and that is not drama, that is arithmetic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights and you push the door open and step inside, carrying the storm with you whether you want to or not. The door shuts with a wooden thud that sounds too final. Inside, the air smells of pine resin, old smoke, damp wool, and the faint, sour note of stored food. You stamp your feet and the snow melts instantly, turning the packed dirt floor slick and dark. The blizzard is already working on the walls, a steady pressure, a sound like distant surf. You take off your outer coat and hang it near the fire, knowing it will never fully dry, just warm enough to trick you in the morning. This is not a place designed for comfort. It is designed for not dying tonight. In the 1800s, thousands of people across North America and parts of Europe slept in cabins like this through winters that modern meteorologists would politely call extreme. That is a mainstream historical fact that still makes climate historians blink. Average winter temperatures in frontier regions could sit well below freezing for weeks, sometimes months, and cabins were often the only barrier between a family and exposure. You feel that reality immediately. Even with a fire burning, the cold presses in like a personality, patient and confident. You move deeper into the room, careful of your footing. Everything is close. The bed is a platform against the wall. A rough table sits nearby, scarred by knives and hot pots. Pegs hold extra clothing. There is no hallway, no buffer zone. The cabin is one space, one shared breath. The walls are made of stacked logs, hand-hewn with chinking pressed into the gaps. Mud, clay, straw, sometimes even moss. People used what they had. A quirky tidbit that still surprises people is that some cabins used animal hair mixed into the chinking for strength and insulation. If you're wrinkling your nose right now, yes, it smelled when it got wet. Outside, the blizzard strengthens. You hear the pitch of the wind change a higher whistle, slipping through cracks you did not notice before. The cabin responds. Wood contracts and shifts with sharp little pops. It sounds like someone tapping from the outside. You remind yourself it is just physics, not visitors. Historians still argue whether early settlers exaggerated these sounds in their diaries out of fear, or whether the structures themselves really were that loud under stress. Either way, you're very awake. You move closer to the fire. The hearth is built of stone and clay, uneven but functional. Flames lick upward orange and reassuring throwing light that trembles across the walls. Fire is everything here. Heat, light, cooked food, boiled water, comfort and danger all rolled into one. You hold your hands out and feel the skin tighten as the warmth returns. Too close and you risk burns. Too far and your fingers go numb. There is no thermostat, just judgment learned the hard way. As you settle in, you become aware of how quiet the world is beyond the wind. Snow absorbs sound. That is a real phenomenon one modern acousticians still explain with absorption coefficients and surface area. To you, it just feels like being wrapped in cotton. The storm is loud, yet somehow muffled, like it is happening in another universe that occasionally leaks through the walls. This quiet messes with your head. You're used to background noise. Here silence waits for you to think. You take stock of supplies without meaning to. A small stack of split logs near the hearth, a bucket for water already rimmed with ice, shelves with dried beans, cornmeal, maybe salted pork. Enough to last if the storm moves on, not enough if it decides to linger. In the 1800s, blizzards could trap families for days. That is not a myth. Weather records and personal letters line up on that point, even if historians debate how often complete isolation really happened versus partial movement between neighbours. You sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress is straw covered with a worn blanket. It rustles when you shift a dry, whispery sound. Straw mattresses were common, cheap, and easy to refresh, but they were also home to insects and mice. There is a fringe historical debate over how pervasive that problem really was. Some scholars argue later accounts exaggerated it for dramatic effect. You decide it does not matter. You're tired. The cold creeps back the moment you stop moving. Your nose feels it first, then your toes. You pull on an extra layer, maybe a wool shawl or another shirt. Clothing for sleep is not about elegance. It is about survival. People slept in what they owned, often everything they owned, and sometimes shared beds for warmth. You will think about that more later. For now, you listen. The wind rises, falls, then rises again, throwing snow against the logs with a soft, relentless hiss. It is like being slowly buried alive, except you are awake to notice it. You imagine the drifts building outside, pressing against the walls. Snow can be an enemy, but it can also insulate. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about how much snow buildup actually improved cabin warmth versus increasing structural risk. Lying here, you feel both possibilities at once. You lie back and stare at the ceiling where soot stains form abstract shapes. Faces, animals, maps of nowhere. Your eyelids grow heavy, then snap open at a sudden crack from the fire. A log shifts, sending a brief shower of sparks upward. Your heart jumps. Fire keeps you alive, but it could also end everything while you sleep. That fear never fully leaves. You breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of the storm. In-out. The cabin rocks slightly, or maybe that is just your imagination adjusting to the sound. Either way, you're here now. The night has begun, and sleep will come when it is ready, not when you ask. The cabin does not look impressive by daylight standards, but at night, especially during a blizzard, you begin to understand that every line and angle is the result of hard lessons. You run your fingers along the nearest wall, feeling the shallow grooves left by an axe head. These logs were not milled smooth. They were cut, shaped, and stacked by hand, often by the same people, who would later sleep inches away from them. In the 1800s, log cabins became a dominant form of housing on frontiers precisely because they could be built quickly with local materials, a historical fact so basic it is sometimes overlooked. Speed mattered. Winter did not wait. You notice how low the ceiling is. You could probably touch it if you stood on the bed. This is not accidental. A smaller interior space is easier to heat. Warm air has less room to rise and escape. Some later commentators assumed this was primitive design, but many architectural historians now argue it was a form of practical thermal engineering learned through experience rather than textbooks. The cabin hugs you close like it does not want to let warmth go. The logs themselves vary in size. Some are thick, some thinner, depending on what trees were available, and how exhausted the builders were by the time they reached that layer. Gaps between them are packed with chinking, and you can see where it has cracked and been repaired again and again. Mud dries, shrinks and falls out. Straw rots, moss dries and crumbles. Maintenance was constant. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about whether cabins were ever truly airtight, or whether settlers simply accepted a certain level of indoor wind as unavoidable. Judging by the cold ribbon you feel along your ankle, you lean toward the second theory. The door is a heavy slab of wood hung on leather or metal hinges depending on resources. You noticed earlier that it does not quite fit its frame. That is normal. Wood swells and contracts with humidity and temperature. In winter it shrinks, leaving gaps that whistle when the wind hits just right. Some cabins used animal skins or extra planks as makeshift seals. A quirky historical tidbit is that old quilts were sometimes nailed over doors in winter, sacrificing beauty for warmth without hesitation. You glance toward the small window. It is tiny little more than a square cut into the wall. Glass was expensive and fragile. Many cabins used oiled paper or thin animal hide instead. Even when glass was present, it was often uneven, bubbling, slightly distorting the outside world. Windows were heat leaks, so they were kept small. There is still debate among historians about how much natural light people actually valued versus how much they feared losing heat. In a blizzard like this, light feels like a luxury you cannot afford. The roof above you is pitched steeply, so snow slides off rather than piling up too heavily. That is not universal, but it is common in regions that saw heavy snowfall. Roofs were often made of split logs, wooden shingles, or even sod in some places. Sod roofs provided excellent insulation, but came with their own problems, including leaks, and occasionally plants sprouting indoors come spring. Yes, really. People wrote about finding grass growing above their beds, which sounds charming until you remember the damp. You shift on the bed again, feeling the floorboards creak beneath. If this cabin has a wooden floor at all, that is a sign of relative comfort. Many cabins had bare earth floors, sometimes covered with rushes or animal skins. Wood floors lifted you slightly above the frozen ground, reducing heat loss and moisture. Historians continue to discuss how common wooden floors truly were in early cabins, versus later recollections smoothing over harsher realities. Either way, you're grateful for anything between you and the cold soil. The hearth sits at one end of the cabin, often built against an exterior wall. Stone retains heat, well radiating it slowly even as the fire dies down. Chimneys, however, were a constant worry. Poor construction could lead to smoke filling the room, or sparks igniting the roof. You notice the blackened stones and think about how many nights like this they have witnessed. Fireplaces were often oversized, a choice that seems inefficient until you remember they were used for cooking, heating, and light all at once. As the wind howls, you become aware of how the cabin is oriented. Builders often face doors away from prevailing winds, when possible a small but meaningful decision. This kind of environmental awareness was not written down in manuals at first. It was passed along neighbour to neighbour, sometimes learned the hard way. There is still academic discussion about how much of this knowledge came from indigenous practices and how much developed independently among settlers. The truth is likely tangled like most history. You lie back, letting the structure of the cabin fade into the background hum of the storm. Every creak now feels familiar rather than alarming. The building is doing its job, flexing instead of breaking, breathing instead of resisting. You realize that sleeping here is not about being perfectly warm or perfectly safe. It is about balance. Enough heat, enough shelter, enough trust in the walls around you to close your eyes. Outside, snow continues to fall, erasing paths and reshaping the land. Inside, the cabin holds steady, imperfect but resilient. You pull your blanket higher, feel the rough fabric against your chin, and allow your thoughts to slow. The night is long, but the cabin is ready for it, and for now so are you. You notice it most when the wind shifts. A thin, sneaky breath of cold slides across your cheek, not enough to shock you awake, just enough to remind you that the outside world has opinions. The door, sturdy as it looks, is never a perfect seal. You can see the faintest line of pale light at its edge when the fire flares, and you imagine snow piling up on the other side, pressing but never quite stopping that leak. In the 1800s, doors were often the weakest point in cabin construction, a simple historical reality that shaped how people slept and lived. You sit up and press your hand near the bottom of the door. The air there is noticeably colder. People learned quickly to block these drafts with whatever they had. Extra boots, rolled blankets, sacks of grain, even chunks of firewood were shoved against doors at night. A quirky but well-documented tidbit is that some families kept a dedicated draft stopper made from stuffed cloth or animal hide, an early ancestor of something you might buy online today, without thinking twice. The door itself is heavy, thick enough to stop a casual blow, but it hangs slightly uneven. Hinges were hand-forged if metal was available or carved from wood and leather if not. Over time they sagged. Moisture warped the frame. Every winter made the problem worse. Historians still debate whether settlers prioritised ease of exit in emergencies over airtightness, or whether they simply lack the tools to do better. Sitting here, you suspect it was both. The latch is simple, a wooden bar or metal hook that keeps the door from swinging open in the wind. Locks were rare in isolated areas. Security came from distance, not hardware. At night, that simplicity is both comforting and unsettling. The door keeps the storm out mostly, but it would not stop a determined intruder or a curious animal. You push that thought aside. Worry burns calories you cannot spare. Cold air creeps along the floor first. Heat rises, and you can feel the gradient clearly. Your head is relatively warm. Your feet are not. This is why beds were often raised even slightly and why people slept with their feet wrapped or tucked under layers. There is an ongoing scholarly argument about whether people in the 1800s experienced cold differently due to acclimatization. Some argue their tolerance was higher. Others suggest they simply endured because there was no alternative. As your toes tingle, you lean toward endurance. You pull your blanket tighter and feel its weight. Wool is scratchy, but it holds warmth even when damp. Cotton was less common in cold regions for bedding and linen, while breathable did little to trap heat. Animal furs, when available, were prized. You might have one draped over the foot of the bed, stiff with age, smelling faintly of smoke and oil. A fringe historical detail that rarely makes it into textbooks is how often people complained about the smell of their own bedding, yet kept using it because warmth mattered more than comfort. The door rattles as a stronger gust hits, not violently, just enough to make its presence known. You hear snow sliding down the exterior wall with a soft rush. For a moment you imagine it piling up against the door, sealing it completely. That could be good or bad. Snow insulates, but it also traps. Diaries from the period mention people digging their way out in the morning, sometimes through windows or even chimneys if doors were blocked. There is still debate among historians about how common these extreme scenarios were versus how often they were remembered because they were dramatic. You adjust your position, turning slightly to keep your warmer side toward the draft. Sleep in a cabin like this is not static. You shift tuck and adapt through the night, responding to changes in wind and fire. People learn to sleep lightly, waking at small changes in temperature or sound. Modern sleep science might call this fragmented rest, but for many it was normal. The fire pops again, sending a brief wave of warmth across the room. Shadows jump on the door, exaggerating its uneven edges. You think about how many hands have pushed that door closed against storms like this. Families, travelers, children barely tall enough to reach the latch. The door is a boundary not just between inside and out, but between survival and exposure. As the night deepens, the draft becomes part of the cabin's rhythm. It is no longer an interruption, just another sound layered into the storm. Your breathing slows. The cold no longer shocks. It hums. You accept that the door will never seal perfectly, and that perfection was never the goal. Staying warm enough, dry enough, alive enough, that was success. Your eyes close for longer stretches now. The wind still whispers through the cracks, but it feels farther away. The door holds. The cabin holds. You drift, knowing that morning, if it comes, will bring new challenges, but for now the night is doing what nights do best, pulling you gently towards sleep. You wake slightly when the sound changes. Not louder, not softer, just different. The wind has shifted direction, and now the snow is no longer skimming past the cabin. It is pressing into it. You hear it first as a dull padded thump, then as a steady insistent hush, like someone brushing the walls over and over with a giant hand. Snow is leaning in, testing the structure, finding every corner and seam. You stay still listening, letting your body decide whether this is a danger sound or just another voice in the storm. Snow piles fast in blizzards like this. Well-established weather records from the 19th century describe drifts higher than doors, fences erased overnight and paths vanishing between dusk and dawn. As you lie there, you picture the cabin slowly being swallowed at its base, the white creeping upward like a tide that moves without water. It should feel terrifying, and part of you does tense, but another part knows something important. Snow, when it settles, traps air. And trapped air means insulation. The temperature near the wall changes almost imperceptibly. The bitter edge softens. Snow pressed tightly against logs can act like a blanket, reducing heat loss. Settlers noticed this early on, even if they did not use scientific language to describe it. Some families deliberately packed snow against their cabins once the storm eased, especially on the windward side. It looks counterintuitive, even foolish, but it worked often enough to become habit in colder regions. That practice still surprises modern readers, and it remains a topic of quiet disagreement among historians who question how intentional or widespread it truly was. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of warmth you've built. The wall beside you feels less cold now. Not warm exactly, but no longer biting. The logs are doing their job, thick with years of growth, rings dense and slow to surrender heat. Each log was cut from a living tree often nearby, sometimes hauled by hand or sled. The age of those trees mattered. Older, slower-grown timber resisted cold better than younger wood, a detail noted by later forestry studies but learned through trial long before. Outside, the storm continues to build its architecture. Snow fills gaps between logs on the exterior, seals cracks you felt earlier near the floor. The wind loses some of its voice. The hiss fades to a low murmur. Inside, the cabin feels smaller, more enclosed, like it has been tucked in. You understand now why some people describe snowed-in cabins as oddly peaceful once the initial fear passed. That peace was never guaranteed. Period letters and journals mention roofs collapsing under excessive snow load, especially when storms followed thaws that added weight. Builders tried to angle roofs steeply to shed snow, but materials varied, and craftsmanship depended on skill and exhaustion. There is no full agreement among scholars about how common roof failures really were. Some argue they were rare and therefore memorable. Others believe they happened more often, but went underreported because survival stories favoured endurance over accident. You listen carefully for any creaks from above. The roof groans once, a long, slow sound like someone stretching. Then it settles. Snow slides off in a muffled rush, landing somewhere near the wall. Your heart rate slows again. This is what vigilance looks like here. Not panic, just attention. The snow outside also blocks light. Even the faint glow that filtered through the window earlier is gone. The world beyond the cabin might as well not exist. Darkness presses close, but it is softened by firelight. The hearth throws a warm oval onto the wall, its edges trembling. Shadows thicken where the snow blocks reflection. You feel suspended, neither fully buried nor fully exposed. You think about how storms like this change behaviour. Travel stopped. Work paused. Time itself felt altered. Contemporary observers wrote about blizzards as if they were living things that decided when life could resume. Inside cabins, people adjusted routines, conserving energy, eating more deliberately, sleeping longer. Some modern researchers suggest these forced pauses had psychological effects, deepening bonds but also intensifying isolation. Lying here, you can sense both possibilities humming in the quiet. Snow also changes sound. The outside world becomes oddly distant. Even the wind seems farther away now, filtered through layers of packed white. The silence between gusts grows longer. It can feel comforting or unsettling, depending on your thoughts. Tonight it feels like a held breath. You reach out and touch the wall again. It's still cold but steady. No moisture seeps through. That matters. Damp cold is worse than dry cold, a truth learned by anyone who lived through these winters. Wet logs could freeze, crack, and weaken. Dry snow, for all its menace, was often preferred. An odd but documented detail from frontier life is how people judge storms not just by severity, but by snow quality. Light and dry meant survivable. Heavy and wet meant trouble. As the night stretches on, you become aware that the snow is now shaping the cabin's fate as much as the builders did. It braces walls, quiets wind, and reshapes temperature. It also traps you. If the storm does not ease, morning will require effort. Shovels, hands, patience. That is a problem for later. For now, the cabin feels wrapped, almost cradled. The storm has shifted from attacker to reluctant ally. You pull your blanket closer, feeling the faint vibration of wind through the logs dulled by snow. Your breathing deepens. The world outside can rearrange itself all it wants. Inside, the night is settling into a slower, steadier rhythm, and sleep edges closer, careful not to wake you. You wake just enough to notice the fire has changed. It is lower now, less dramatic. No tall flames licking upward, just a steady glow and the soft red pulse of embers. This is the heart of the cabin, and you feel its condition the way you feel your own pulse. Too low and the cold will creep back aggressively. Too high and the room becomes stifling, risky, even deadly. People in the 19th century understood this balance intimately. Period household guides and personal journals describe fire tending as a near-constant task. During winter, a rhythm woven into both day and night. You push yourself upright, joints stiff, and slide closer to the hearth. The stone radiates stored warmth, comforting and dry. You extend your hands and rotate them slowly, palms, backs, fingertips. This is muscle memory, now something learned not through instruction but repetition. Fire was not just warmth, it was reassurance. As long as it lived, so did you. That is not poetry, that is logistics. Wood choice mattered more than you might expect. Hardwoods like oak or maple burned longer and hotter, while softer woods like pine ignited quickly, but vanished fast, often throwing sparks. Settlers knew this even if their choices were limited by geography. Forest composition shaped nightly routines. In regions dominated by softwood, people woke more often to feed the fire. There remains disagreement among researchers about how frequently families rose at night to tend hearths versus letting them die down until morning. The truth likely varied by household weather severity and fuel availability. You add a log, carefully nudging embers aside so it catches slowly. The sound is subtle at first, a faint crackle, then a gentle sigh as heat blooms outward. Smoke curls upward, pulled by the chimney's imperfect draft. You watch it closely. Too much smoke means trouble. Chimneys in early cabins were notorious weak points. Some were built of stone, others of wood lined with clay. Chimney fires were a constant fear. Letters from the era mention the smell of burning pitch, or the sudden roar that sent families scrambling into snow barefoot. The air in the cabin shifts as the fire strengthens. Warmth spreads unevenly, pooling near the ceiling first. You feel it on your face while your feet remain stubbornly cold. This vertical imbalance was a known annoyance. People compensated by sleeping elevated, wearing caps indoors and keeping extra layers over their lower bodies. A lesser-known habit was hanging damp clothing near the hearth overnight, not to dry completely, but to keep it from freezing solid. The smell was not pleasant, but frozen clothes were worse. Fire also meant light. The glow stretches the room, softening shadows, making the cabin feel larger than it is. Darkness presses at the edges, but the hearth pushes back. Before widespread access to candles or lamps, the fire was often the only illumination after sunset. Even when candles were available, they were conserved. Tallow candles smoked, smelled, and consumed valuable animal fat. Many households reserve them for specific tasks, leaving the fire to do most of the work. You sit quietly listening to the fire speak. Pops ticks the occasional sharper crack. Each sound has meaning. A loud snap might mean a resin pocket bursting. A low groan could signal a shifting log. Experienced ears could tell when a fire needed attention just by sound. Some modern historians suggest this deep familiarity with fire bordered on companionship. Others caution against romanticizing it, reminding us that fire was also a relentless threat. Both can be true. The heat draws moisture from the air, drying your skin, tightening it slightly. You rub your hands together and feel the roughness, small cracks at the knuckles. Winter did this to everyone. Cold outside, dry heat inside. People used animal fats or oils to protect skin, a practical solution that doubled as cooking supply. An odd but well-recorded detail is how often these substances were shared between kitchen and body, without distinction. You glance toward the bed. The blanket's weight already warmed slightly by the fire's reach. You know the routine. Feed the fire enough to last, not so much that it roars. Bank the embers with ash to slow combustion. This technique extended heat through the night and reduced the risk of sparks. It required practice. Too much ash smothered the fire. Too little, and it burned out too fast. There is no full consensus among scholars about how universally this method was used, but enough first-hand accounts describe it to suggest it was common knowledge. As you prepare to lie back down, you feel a quiet satisfaction. The fire is set. The cabin hums softly, a low warm counterpoint to the storm outside. Firelight dances across the walls, briefly illuminating tool marks, nail heads, the grain of wood. These details fade as your eyes adjust. You settle back into bed, positioning yourself to take advantage of the remaining warmth. The fire will carry you for a while. Maybe until dawn, maybe not. That uncertainty is part of the night. You listen as the crackling slows, become steadier. The cabin exhales. Outside, the blizzard continues its work, but inside, fire holds the line. You close your eyes, trusting embers, stone, and habit. Sleep comes easier now, wrapped in the quiet agreement between flame and shelter that has kept people alive through winters like this for generations. The air thickens before you notice why. It is subtle at first, a faint bite at the back of your throat, a dryness that does not belong to cold alone. You open your eyes and breathe more carefully. Smoke. Not enough to panic, just enough to demand attention. In cabins like this, smoke was a companion that refused to keep its distance. Contemporary accounts describe rooms that hovered in a constant haze during winter, especially when the weather pressed hard against chimneys and reversed their draw. You sit up slowly so you do not stir the ash too much. The fire settled into a low glow, but the smoke is not rising cleanly. Wind outside can push air back down the chimney, a phenomenon people understood long before it had a scientific name. You watch the smoke curl sideways, then drift toward the ceiling where it lingers like a stubborn thought. Your eyes sting slightly. You blink and wait. Patience matters more than force here. Ventilation was a gamble. Open the door or window too much and you invite the cold to reclaim the room. Keep everything sealed and the air grows heavy, sour and dangerous. Well-documented household advice from the 19th century often warned against sleeping in fully closed rooms with active fires, even as people continued to do exactly that out of necessity. Survival meant choosing which risk felt more manageable. You reach for a small stick and gently adjust the logs, coaxing the fire to burn cleaner. A brighter flame consumes smoke more efficiently, at least in theory. In practice, results vary. Chimneys built of stone with smooth interiors drew better than those patched together with clay and wood. Many early chimneys were built on the outside of cabins to reduce fire risk, but this also made them colder, increasing downdrafts during storms. Researchers continue to question which design was truly safer overall, and the answer seems to depend on region, materials, and luck. The smell of smoke settles into everything. Your hair, your clothes, the blankets. People of the era carried that scent with them constantly. It marked their homes, their bodies, their belongings. A lesser-known detail from travellers' journals is how quickly visitors noticed the smell when entering cabins, even ones kept meticulously clean by the standards of the day. Smoke was not dirt. It was a byproduct of staying alive. You crack the door just enough to let fresh air slip in. The cold rushes across the floor sharp and immediate. Your ankles protest. You close the gap again, sliding a boot back into place as a barrier. The smoke thins, grudgingly retreating toward the chimney. Your breathing eases. This dance repeats itself many times through the night. Adjust, wait, feel, respond. The ceiling above you is darkened with soot layered over years. Each winter adds another faint stain. This build-up reduced light and absorbed heat, but it also posed risks. Soot is flammable. Chimney sweeps were rare or non-existent in frontier settings, so maintenance was done by whoever lived there. Some families burned small, intense fires periodically to clear chimneys, a practice that sounds alarming because it was. It worked until it did not. Accounts from the time-mentioned cabins lost to chimney fires that started quietly and ended quickly. Despite the risk, smoke also carried comfort. It signalled warmth, cooking human presence. In blizzards, the sight or smell of smoke could guide lost travellers to shelter. That dual nature fascinates modern scholars who debate whether smoke was viewed more as a hazard or a reassurance by those who lived with it daily. The answer likely shifted with mood, weather, and memory. Your throat feels dry now. You swallow and reach for the water bucket, careful to break the thin layer of ice that has formed on top. You take a small sip. The water tastes faintly of wood and metal. Cold water at night was not just refreshment. It helped soothe smoke-irritated lungs. Some households kept herbal infusions for this purpose, made from plants gathered in warmer months. These remedies varied widely, and their effectiveness remains uncertain, but belief carried its own power. The fire crackles softly as you settle back down. Smoke thins to a manageable veil, more scent than substance now. Your eyes adjust again. You learn to breathe shallowly when needed, deeper when the air clears. This awareness becomes second nature. Sleep does not erase it entirely. Even in dreams, part of you listens for changes in air and flame. There is a quiet argument among historians about how much smoke exposure affected long-term health in these environments. Some point to respiratory issues described in later life. Others argue that time spent outdoors balanced the exposure. The records are incomplete, shaped by who wrote them and why. What is clear is that people adapted not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. You think about mornings when the cabin would be thick with smoke from rekindled fires, doors flung open briefly despite the cold to clear the air. Night is different. Night asks for compromise. You accept a little discomfort in exchange for warmth and light. You accept that perfect air is a luxury of the future. As the storm continues outside, the cabin breathes with you. Inhale, exhale. Smoke rises, disperses, settles. The balance holds for now. You feel your body relax again, muscles loosening as the immediate threat passes. The smell of smoke fades into the background, familiar and oddly reassuring. You turn onto your side, pulling the blanket up near your chin. The fire hums quietly, doing what it can without demanding constant attention. The air is not perfect, but it is enough. In this place and time, enough is the goal. Your breathing slows, the cabin steadies. Sleep returns, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke that will linger long after morning comes. You're not fully asleep when you realize how loud the night actually is. Not loud in the way of shouting or crashing, but layered, restless, alive. The wind never stops. It rises, falls, pauses just long enough to make you think it might be over, then returns with renewed purpose. The cabin answers each shift with its own language. Wood flexes. Joints complain. Somewhere above you, a beam settles with a low, tired sigh. People in the 19th century wrote often about these nighttime sounds, especially newcomers who had not yet learned which noises meant danger and which were simply the house doing its work. Logs shrink in the cold, expanding slightly when warmed by the fire, then contracting again as the embers fade. That cycle repeats through the night, creating a chorus of small, sharp cracks and longer groaning murmurs. To an untrained ear, it could sound like footsteps or knocking or something worse. You lie still listening. The bed creaks softly as you shift your weight. Straw rustles beneath you. Somewhere near the wall, you hear a faint scratching sound. You freeze, then it stops. Mice were common in cabins like this, drawn by warmth and stored food. Journals from rural settlements mention them casually as part of life rather than a crisis. People set traps, kept cats when they could, and learned to ignore the sounds unless they became too bold. Tonight the scratching does not return and you release a breath you did not realize you were holding. Between gusts of wind there is a strange quiet. Snow absorbs sound so effectively that the world feels wrapped and distant. Modern acoustic studies explain this with physics, but people back then explained it with metaphor. They described storms as blankets, as walls, as silencing forces. Some even believed heavy snowfall changed the behavior of animals and spirits alike, making nights feel more watchful. Whether those beliefs shaped perception, or grew from it, is still an open question among cultural historians. The wind hits hard again, rattling the door and making the fire flicker. Shadows leap across the walls, stretching and shrinking like living things. Your mind, half awake, half dreaming, fills in gaps. A shadow looks like a figure. A creak sounds like a voice. You remind yourself where you are, you count breaths. You listen past the initial fear, letting understanding replace imagination. Outside branches snap under the weight of snow or the force of the wind. The sound carries through the logs, dull and distant, like a drum struck underwater. You picture trees bending, shedding limbs, reshaping the landscape in the dark. Storms like this changed forests as much as they changed people's routines. Afterward, settlers often found paths, blocked fences, crushed landmarks altered. The land never stayed still for long. Inside, smaller sounds dominate. The fire gives a soft pop as a pocket of sap bursts. Ash shifts with a whisper. Your own breathing seems loud in the quiet moments. You can hear the fabric of your blanket move when you adjust it, the faint scrape of wool on straw. Sleep in a place like this is not silent. It is textured. Some families tried to fill that texture with intentional noise. Talking, praying, singing softly. Keeping sound meant keeping fear at bay. Children were often lulled to sleep by stories during storms. Tales repeated so often they became familiar anchors. There is evidence in family letters that these oral traditions grew stronger during long winters, though how much was necessity and how much was cultural preference remains uncertain. You do not speak now. Words feel too sharp. Instead, you let the sounds wash over you, cataloguing them without judgment. Wind, high, wind, low. Wood, settling. Fire, breathing. Each sound confirms that the cabin is still standing, still holding together under pressure. Silence would be worse. Silence might mean something has gone wrong. Your body adjusts to the rhythm. What startled you an hour ago now barely registers. This is adaptation, slow and unconscious. People learned to sleep through storms because they had to. Light sleepers did not last long in environments like this. Over time, the brain learned which noises mattered and which could be ignored. That learning carried across generations, passed down not in words but in nervous systems. There is a long-standing discussion among researchers about how much this constant environmental noise influenced stress levels and mental health. Some suggest it built resilience. Others argue it took a toll that only became visible later in life. The sources do not agree, and the people who lived it rarely frame their experiences in those terms. They were too busy listening. You turn onto your other side, nestling deeper into the bed. The wall is closer now, radiating faint cold through the logs. You tuck the blanket tighter along your back. The sounds continue, but they no longer demand your attention. They blend into something almost musical, a rough, uneven lullaby shaped by weather and wood. Outside, the blizzard roars. Inside, the cabin murmurs. Between the two, you float in a narrow band of safety suspended by logs, fire, and familiarity. Your eyelids grow heavier. The sounds soften, not because they stop, but because you stop reaching for them. Sleep deepens, carrying you forward through the long, noisy night. You wake with the small, practical realization that sleep here is built in layers just like everything else. Before blankets, before straw, before even the bed itself, there is clothing. You do not undress in the modern sense. You subtract risk. Every garment you remove is a calculation about heat, moisture, and movement. In winters like this, people in the 19th century often slept in most of what they owned not because they wanted to, but because night erased the margin for error. You sit up and feel the weight of fabric pulling at your shoulders. Wool shirt, another layer beneath it, may be linen against the skin if you're lucky. Wool itches, especially when worn this long, but it insulates even when damp. That property made it invaluable long before chemistry could explain why. Sheep husbandry shaped winter survival more than many political decisions ever did a reality, quietly reflected in inventories and estate records from the period. You tug your sleeves down, covering your wrists. Exposed skin loses heat quickly and the body knows it. People learn to sleep bundled not for comfort but for efficiency. Caps were common at night, even indoors. Heat escapes through the head faster than most people realize. Nightcaps, often made of wool or flannel, show up repeatedly in personal letters and household lists. They were not fashion. They were tools. You adjust your socks thick and uneven, maybe darned so many times they barely resemble their original shape. Feet mattered. Cold feet meant restless sleep. Numbness, sometimes frostbite if conditions were severe enough. There are accounts of people warming socks by the fire before bed, then pulling them on quickly to trap heat. It didn't last all night, but it helped at the start. Some families kept foot warmers filled with heated stones or coals, though these carried obvious risks and were used cautiously. Layers also helped manage moisture. Sweat was dangerous in winter. Damp clothing could chill you fast once you stopped moving. People learned to vent heat by loosening layers briefly, then sealing themselves back up. This required attention and self-awareness even when half asleep. Modern historians examining these routines note how much embodied knowledge was required just to get through a night. It was not instinct, it was learned. You shift your shoulders, easing the fabric where it bunches uncomfortably. Sleeping dressed restricts movement. Turning over takes effort. But stillness conserves heat. You find a position that works and commit to it. In some regions, people slept in shifts during extreme cold, warming themselves by the fire in turns. Whether this was common or reserved for the harshest conditions is debated among specialists, but scattered references suggest it happened often enough to be remembered. Your clothing smells faintly of smoke, wool oil, and old sweat. That scent clings to everything here. Clean clothes were a luxury. Washing in winter meant ice water, cracked hands, and clothes that might freeze before they dried. Many households reduced washing frequency during the coldest months, choosing warmth over freshness. Travellers sometimes remarked on this without understanding the trade-off. You understand it now. You pull the blanket up and feel it compress against the layers beneath. The combined thickness traps air, creating a barrier that feels surprisingly effective. Insulation works by slowing heat loss, not by generating warmth. That principle governed every decision even if no one named it. You feel your body gradually warming its small pocket of air, a private climate held together by fabric and patience. Some people slept with extra clothing placed strategically, a coat draped over the chest, a shawl tucked around the neck, scarves wound loosely to protect the throat. The neck was considered vulnerable, a place where cold could settle and sickness could start. This belief appears often in medical advice from the era, though physicians disagreed on its accuracy. Still, habits persist long after debates fade. You think briefly about how children slept. Smaller bodies lose heat faster. Families bundled them heavily, sometimes swaddling older children in ways that seem excessive now. The goal was not independence, it was survival. Adults often sacrificed their own comfort to ensure children stayed warm. Letters and diaries reveal quiet pride in this alongside exhaustion. Night after night, winter demanded attention. Your fingers find a tear in one sleeve repaired long ago with mismatched thread. Clothing was patched endlessly. Fabric was valuable. Even worn garments served multiple lives, passing from adult to child, from daywear to nightwear, from clothing to rags. An unusual but documented practice involved stuffing worn fabric into bedding or draft gaps, giving old clothes one final purpose as insulation. You settle back, listening to the storm as it presses against the walls. The layers you wear mute its cold reach, but you remain aware of it, a presence just beyond your cocoon. The fire crackles softly, offering reassurance without overwhelming heat. You do not want to sweat. You want balance. There is ongoing discussion among scholars about how sleeping clothed affected long-term sleep patterns and health. Some suggest it disrupted rest. Others argue bodies adapted efficiently. The evidence is scattered, drawn from anecdote more than measurement. What is clear is that people did not think in terms of ideal sleep. They thought in terms of morning. Did you wake up functional? Did you wake up alive? You tuck your hands between layers, warming them against your body. Fingertips sting faintly as circulation improves. You breathe slowly, feeling the fabric rise and fall with each breath. The layers no longer feel cumbersome. They feel protective, like armor softened by repetition. Outside, the wind howls again, but it feels farther away now. Your clothing holds, the blankets hold, the cabin holds. Wrapped in wool and habit, you drift deeper, trusting layers of simple materials to stand between you and the cold, until morning decides what comes next. You become aware of another presence beside you, not new, just newly noticed. A shoulder, a back, another warm shape sharing the narrow space. Beds in cabins like this were rarely designed for one person alone. They were built to conserve heat, not privacy. Sleeping together was practical, expected, and often necessary. In cold months, body heat was one of the most reliable resources available, and people used it without hesitation. You shift carefully so you do not wake anyone. Movement steals warmth, and sudden motions can let cold air rush in. You find a position where your back fits against another body, the contact immediate and unmistakably warmer than the air around you. The heat is steady, alive, reassuring. Long before central heating, people understood this instinctively. Warmth shared lasts longer. Household records and personal correspondence from the 19th century frequently mention shared beds not just between spouses, but among siblings, parents, and children, travellers and guests. Space was limited. Beds were expensive. Heating multiple sleeping areas was inefficient. It made sense to concentrate warmth in one place. Some modern readers misunderstand this, projecting contemporary ideas of privacy backward. Those ideas did not apply here in the same way. You adjust again, syncing your breathing unconsciously with the person beside you. Bodies settle into patterns when they sleep close. One turns, the other responds. Blankets shift, then resettle. Over time, a shared stillness forms. People who grew up this way rarely questioned it. Solitary sleeping was often associated with illness or social separation, not comfort. There are occasional mentions in diaries of nights when too many bodies crowded into one bed, making it difficult to sleep despite the warmth. Elbows, knees uneven, breathing restless, turning. Still warmth usually won the argument. Cold was the greater enemy. When temperatures dropped dangerously low, even social boundaries bent. Neighbours sometimes shared cabins during extreme storms, turning single rooms into clusters of sleeping forms layered with blankets and coats. You feel the subtle shift of weight beside you as the other person settles deeper into sleep. Their warmth spreads, slowly soaking through fabric and blanket. It is not instant comfort. It takes time, just like the fire. But once established, it is remarkably effective. Your side that faces the wall still feels cooler, but the shared centre of the bed becomes a pocket of steady heat. Children often slept between adults, both to keep them warm and to keep them from rolling toward colder edges. Period illustrations and household descriptions show this arrangement clearly, though artists sometimes softened the reality. In practice, sleep was messy, limbs tangled, blankets bunched. Yet morning came more often than not, which was the measure that mattered. There is discussion among social historians about how these sleeping arrangements shaped emotional bonds. Some suggest it fostered closeness and reassurance. Others caution that we should not romanticize conditions driven by necessity. Both views can exist at once. Shared sleep was not always tender, but it was functional, and functionality carried its own form of comfort. You pull the blanket higher, tucking it around both of you. The combined body heat warms the trapped air more efficiently now. You feel your muscles loosen, tension draining from your shoulders. The cold that pressed so insistently earlier retreats another step. Outside, the storm continues indifferent to human arrangements, but inside, cooperation has shifted the odds. There is also the matter of breath. Close quarters mean shared air, warm and slightly damp. In extreme cold, people sometimes pulled blankets over their heads to trap warmth, breathing the same small pocket of air repeatedly. Some believed this could prevent freezing. Others worried about suffocation. Advice varied, and practices differed by household. The fact that people survived suggests they learned limits through experience, though not without risk. You keep your face uncovered, letting cooler air touch your cheeks. Balance again. Always balance. You feel the rise and fall of the chest beside you steady and calm. That rhythm pulls you downward deeper into sleep. Your thoughts slow, then scatter. The bed creaks softly as the cabin shifts around you. The sound barely registers now. Your body has learned what matters. Fire, warmth, stillness. Everything else fades to background texture. The presence beside you anchors you a reminder that survival here was rarely a solitary effort. As the night wears on, you turn once more careful and practiced redistributing warmth without breaking it. The shared heat holds, the blankets settle. The storm howls on the other side of thick logs and packed snow. But in this small, crowded space, warmth is pooled, guarded, and quietly passed back and forth. Sleep deepens, no longer thin or tentative. It is heavier now, supported by more than one body, more than one layer of protection. In this cabin during this storm together is warmer than alone, and that simple truth carries you gently forward through the night. The surface beneath you is never forgotten, even as sleep thickens. Straw shifts under your weight, compressing in places, springing back in others. It crackles softly when you move, a dry whispering sound that blends with the fire and wind. This is the mattress. No coils, no padding, just dried stalks packed into a ticking that has been mended more times than anyone can remember. It is not soft, but it is familiar, and familiarity counts for something on nights like this. Straw bedding was common across rural homes in the 19th century, not because it was ideal, but because it was available. After harvest straw was plentiful. It could be replaced when it broke down, refreshed when it flattened, and repurposed when it wore out completely. People understood its limits. Straw shifted, poked, and lost volume over time. It had to be shaken, turned, or topped up regularly. Ignoring it meant colder nights and restless sleep. You feel a stiff stalk press against your hip and shift slightly to avoid it. This is part of the dance. No one expected uninterrupted comfort. You learn the contours of the bed, quickly memorizing which spots are kinder than others. In colder months, Extra layers went beneath as well as above. Old blankets, worn coats, folded sacks. Anything that added bulk helped trap air and slow the cold creeping up from below. Over the straw lies a blanket, thick and heavy, its fibres matted from years of use. Wool again. It smells faintly of smoke and lanolin. This blanket has weight the kind that pins warmth close to the body. Lighter coverings existed, but they were often reserved for summer or for guests. Winter demanded substance. You pull it higher and feel its edge scratch lightly at your chin. Animal hides sometimes joined the pile. Deer, bear, sheep. When properly cured, they provided remarkable insulation. When poorly treated, they smelled and stiffened, especially in damp conditions. Some households swore by them. Others avoided them if they could. The choice often came down to skill and circumstance rather than preference. Hides were valuable, and wasting one through poor preparation was costly. You remember the way the bed felt when you first lay down, colder, less forgiving. Now, after hours of shared warmth, it feels different. Not warm exactly, but less hostile. The straw has absorbed heat, the blankets have adjusted, the space has been claimed. Sleep here is not about sinking in. It is about settling into an arrangement that holds. There were other options, of course. Feather beds existed, prized and expensive. They were warmer and softer, but they also trapped moisture and required careful maintenance. In very cold weather, feathers could clump or flatten, reducing their effectiveness. Some people complained they slept colder on feathers than on straw layered with the wool. Accounts disagree and preferences varied widely. Comfort was subjective, shaped by habit as much as material. Beneath everything, the bed frame matters. Raised beds kept sleepers off frozen ground and away from draughts that crept low. In simpler cabins, beds were built into walls or corners, sometimes as permanent fixtures. This saved space and reduced movement. You feel the solid presence of wood beneath the straw, reassuring in its steadiness. No sagging, no sway, just support. There is also the matter of pests. Straw invited insects, especially if it was damp. Fleas were a known problem, and people had methods for dealing with them, some more effective than others. Herbs were sometimes mixed into bedding believed to repel pests. Mint, lavender, pennyroyal. Whether these truly worked or simply provided a sense of control is uncertain, but the practice was widespread enough to leave traces in household records and oral tradition. You shift again, careful not to disturb the warmth you and your bedmate have built. The straw sighs and resettles. A small cloud of dust rises invisible in the low light, but you can smell it faintly. Dry, earthy, almost sweet. The smell of harvest lingering into winter. It reminds you distantly that warmth here is borrowed from another season. The bed is narrow. Turning requires negotiation. You roll slowly, synchronizing movement with the other body beside you. The blankets slide, then stop. The straw compresses anew. Once settled, stillness returns. This rhythm repeats through the night, small adjustments layered between longer stretches of rest. Some nights were worse than others. When straw grew too flat or too damp, sleep suffered. People complained of aching backs, stiff joints, shallow rest. Yet they persisted. Better bedding was a goal, but not always achievable. Survival took precedence over comfort, and complaints rarely altered that hierarchy. You breathe deeply now, the bed holding you in its uneven way. It is not luxurious, but it is sufficient. The combination of straw wool, hide and shared warmth has created a pocket where sleep can root. Outside, the storm continues to reshape the world. Inside, the bed does its quiet work, supporting bodies through the long hours until morning decides to return. You wake with a dry mouth and a dull awareness that something is missing. Water. Not the comforting presence of it nearby, but the easy access you are used to. Thirst feels sharper at night, especially in air warmed by fire and thick with smoke. You swallow and feel how little moisture remains. Your body asks for water quietly at first, then with growing insistence. In winters like this, water was never taken for granted. Streams froze, wells iced over. Buckets left near doors could turn solid by morning. People learned quickly that water had to be managed just as carefully as food or fuel. Evening routines often included filling containers and bringing them indoors, placing them close enough to the hearth to slow freezing but far enough to avoid spills or overheating. You reach for the bucket by habit and feel resistance as your fingers press against ice. A thin skin has formed on top, delicate but stubborn. You tap it gently, listening to the faint crack as it breaks apart. The water beneath is painfully cold. You hesitate. Drinking too much icy water can shock the system, especially when the body is warm from sleep and fire. People knew this through experience, not instruction. You take a small sip anyway. It stings your teeth and sends a chill down your throat. The sensation is immediate and vivid, but it brings relief. Thirst eases back, no longer demanding your full attention. In the 19th century, many households preferred to drink warm, or at least tempered water in winter, sometimes heating it slightly before bed. Tea herbal infusions or even plain warmed water were common when fuel allowed. The problem was storage. Ceramic jugs could crack in extreme cold. Wooden buckets absorbed moisture and warped. Metal containers conducted cold, quickly freezing contents faster and less insulated. People experimented constantly, learning which vessels worked best in their environment. There was no universal solution. What worked in one region failed in another. You set the bucket back carefully, tucking it closer to the hearth than before. Even so, you know it may freeze again before morning. Some families wrapped containers in cloth or placed them inside boxes stuffed with straw. Others kept water in bed with them, sealed tightly using body heat to keep it liquid. The idea sounds strange now, but it was practical then. Nighttime thirst also came with a dilemma. Getting up meant exposing yourself to colder air, breaking the warmth you had built. Many people chose to endure thirst rather than risk chilling. Diaries mention waking with cracked lips and sore throats, symptoms blamed on dry winter air as much as lack of water. Morning drinks were often taken eagerly, sometimes too quickly. You lie back down, careful not to spill anything. The cold sip lingers in your chest, cooling from the inside. You pull the blanket higher to compensate. The person beside you shifts slightly, sensing the change in temperature. You settle again, restoring balance. Water was more than thirst relief. It was needed for fire safety, for cooking, for washing. In winter, every use had to be planned. Snow could be melted, but that required fuel and time. Melted snow also tastes flat, lacking minerals, something people noticed even if they could not explain it. Some preferred to melt ice from rivers or ponds instead, believing it tasted better. Preferences varied, shaped by habit and belief. There are scattered references to people keeping a small pot of water warm overnight set near embers, but watched carefully. This reduced freezing risk and provided immediate relief if needed. It also increased fire risk. Every solution carried trade-offs. Night was when those trade-offs felt most pressing, when mistakes were harder to fix. You think briefly about how children handle thirst. Smaller bodies dehydrate faster, and winter air was harsh on young throats. Caregivers often kept special cups for nighttime, offering small sips rather than full drinks. Too much cold water could cause stomach pain or coughing. These details rarely appear in official record, but they surface in letters and family recollections passed down alongside advice and warnings. Your mouth feels better now, no longer sticky or tight. You breathe more easily. The fire crackles softly, drying the air further. You resist the urge for another sip. Enough is enough. Moderation keeps you warm. There is still discussion among researchers about how winter hydration affected health in historical populations. Some suggest chronic mild dehydration was common. Others argue people adapted by consuming soups, broths, and warm drinks that offset water loss. The evidence is indirect, drawn from recipes, household accounts, and medical observations that rarely agree. What is clear is that water management was a constant concern woven into daily and nightly life. You listen to the bucket settle as ice shifts again on its surface. The sound is faint but distinct. Water is still there. That knowledge brings comfort. Even frozen, it represents security. You adjust your position careful to keep warmth pulled where it belongs. As sleep returns, thirst fades into the background, no longer urgent. Your body relaxes, satisfied for now. The night stretches on, quiet and cold but balanced. Fire, water, shelter, breath. All present, all managed. Wrapped in layers and routine, you drift again, knowing that even something as simple as a drink carries weight in a winter like this. Sleep never fully claims you without conditions. Somewhere beneath the warmth and the slow rhythm of breathing, there is a watchfulness that never switches off. It sharpens when you think about the fire. Even now, even low and banked, it is awake. Fire is comfort by day, but at night it becomes a quiet question. Will it behave? Will it stay where it belongs? Will it let you wake up? People who slept in cabins like this carried that question with them every winter. Night fires were necessary yet feared. Accounts from the time speak of families waking suddenly to the smell of burning wood that was not the good kind. Sparks could leap from a log. Embers could roll. A gust of wind could push flame where it did not belong. You lie still, listening for changes in sound, changes in smell, anything that signals danger. Your nose works even while you rest. Smoke has a familiar scent now, but burning wood outside the hearth is different. Sharper. Hotter. It cuts through sleep fast. Many people described waking from deep rest the moment that smell changed. It is a kind of training learned without formal teaching. You trust your senses because you have to. You shift slightly and feel heat on your face, steady and even. That is good. Uneven heat can mean flame climbing higher than intended. You glance toward the hearth. The fire is low embers glowing under a blanket of ash just as you left it. The light is soft, pulsing gently. Shadows barely move. For now it is safe. Cabins were built with fire in mind, but materials were unforgiving. Wood walls, wood floors, wood roofs. Even stone hearths were often set against wooden frames. Clay and mud acted as barriers, but they cracked over time. People patched them constantly. There was no final fix, only ongoing vigilance. Some families kept a bucket of water or snow within reach at night just in case. Others relied on speed and prayer. Children were taught early what fire could do. Stories served as warnings as much as entertainment. Tales of cabins lost in minutes, of families fleeing into snow in their nightclothes. These stories lingered not to frighten, but to instruct. Fire demanded respect. Forgetfulness could be fatal. You listen again. The fire makes a soft settling sound as a coal collapses inward. Normal, harmless. Your shoulders relax a fraction. The storm outside rumbles, but it cannot reach the flame directly. The chimney draws imperfect but functioning. You breathe out slowly. There were times when people chose to let the fire die completely at night, especially if fuel was scarce or conditions were mild. In deep winter, that choice carried risk. Temperatures inside could drop sharply before morning. Waking to a cold hearth meant stiff fingers, slow movements, and difficulty relighting flame. Matches were not always available or reliable. Fire was preserved whenever possible. You think about how people balance this fear with exhaustion. After long days of labour tending animals, hauling wood, cooking, repairing the body demanded rest. Staying half awake every night was not sustainable. Trust had to be placed somewhere, in routine, in habit, in the way embers were banked just so, in the way logs were chosen and positioned. Small decisions carried weight. Some cabins had iron firebacks or grates that helped contain flames. These were valuable and not universal. Others relied on stones gathered from nearby fields or streams. Stone choice mattered. Some cracked under heat, others held. Experience taught which was which. A cracked stone could send sparks outward unexpected and dangerous. You remember the bucket of water again. It sits where you left it, closer to the hearth now. Ice may have formed, but the bulk remains liquid. Enough to act if needed, enough to feel prepared. Preparation calms the mind even when risk remains. There is still debate among modern researchers about how often fatal cabin fires occurred versus how often they were remembered because of their drama. Records are incomplete. Some losses went unrecorded, others were written down in detail. What emerges is not a clear number, but a pattern of awareness. People knew fire could betray them. They lived with that knowledge nightly. Your eyelids grow heavy again. The fear does not vanish, but it softens, settling into the background like the storm. You accept that complete safety is not possible here, that acceptance is part of sleep. You choose to rest anyway. The fire shifts again, sending a brief glow across the room. You smell warmth, not danger. Wood ash smoke. Familiar. You turn slightly, making sure blankets are clear of the hearth's reach. Many fires started from fabric too close to flame. People learn to keep sleeping areas at a careful distance, even in cramped spaces. You think briefly of mornings after long nights like this, of waking to cold air and dim light, checking the hearth first before anything else. Relief when embers still glowed, frustration when they did not. Fire-shaped mornings as much as nights. Your breathing deepens, the person beside you stirs, then settles again. Shared warmth steadies you. The cabin holds, the fire behaves. For now, that is enough. As sleep pulls you under, part of you remains alert, tuned to scent and sound. That part has kept generations alive through winters like this. It does not keep you awake. It keeps you safe. Wrapped in that quiet vigilance, you drift again, trusting the balance you have built to last until morning. Light finds the logs, and smoke rises once more. You notice the smell before anything else. Not unpleasant exactly, just unfamiliar, heavier than wood smoke, warmer somehow. It drifts in from one side of the cabin, faint but persistent. Your half-sleeping mind sorts through possibilities until it lands on the truth. Animals, close by. Not outside in the storm, but near enough to share what warmth there is. You shift slightly, and hear a low sound, almost a vibration more felt than heard. A breath, then another. Livestock often stayed close to cabins during blizzards, sometimes in attached sheds, sometimes beneath the same roof separated only by a rough wall. In the coldest weather, animals were heat sources as much as mouths to feed. Their bodies gave off warmth steadily, reliably, without needing firewood. You turn your head and listen. The sound resolves into slow breathing, the occasional shuffle of hooves or paws. A cow shifts its weight. A goat stamps once annoyed by the cold. Chickens murmur softly, half asleep on their roosts. Even through walls, their presence changes the air. It feels thicker alive, less empty. People tolerated smells they would never accept now. Manure, hay, animal sweat. In winter, these scents were signs of survival. Animals meant milk meat labour and warmth. Keeping them close reduced the risk of freezing and made morning care easier. Storms could make barns inaccessible. Bringing animals nearer was often the safest choice. You wrinkle your nose briefly, then stop noticing the smell altogether. The brain adapts quickly when it must. Cleanliness meant something different here. It was about preventing rot illness infestation, not about eliminating all traces of life. Animals were part of the household economy, not separate from it. There are stories of people sharing cabins with animals during extreme cold, not just nearby but inside the main living space. Sheep penned in corners, pigs near the hearth, dogs curled against sleeping bodies. These arrangements were temporary but memorable. Warmth mattered more than order. Privacy vanished when the temperature dropped far enough. You hear a dog sigh somewhere near the door, a long contented exhale. Dogs earned their place indoors during storms. They guarded against predators, warned of intruders, and added another layer of shared heat. Many slept directly against people, their fur thick and insulating. You imagine one pressed against the foot of the bed, radiating warmth without complaint. Animals brought risks too. Disease, parasites, accidents. A startled animal could knock over objects. Fire and livestock were a dangerous mix. People learned to secure animals carefully, tying them where needed, keeping them calm. Familiarity helped. Animals accustomed to winter routines handle confinement better than those brought in suddenly. You think about how quiet animals become in storms. They conserve energy instinctively. Movement slows. Sounds soften. Their stillness adds to the strange calm inside the cabin, even as the blizzard rages outside. Life pulls inward, gathering itself tightly against the cold. The wall between you and the animals feels warmer than the others. You rest your hand against it, briefly sensing the difference. It is subtle, but real. Shared warmth travels through wood and packed earth. The cabin becomes a network of heat sources, each contributing a little. Fire, bodies, animals, even stored food adds insulation simply by existing. Some people believed animals could sense weather changes better than humans. Restlessness, refusal to settle, unusual sounds were taken as warnings. Whether this belief was accurate or shaped by selective memory is unclear, but many trusted it. Tonight the animals are calm. That comforts you more than logic might. You recall advice passed quietly between neighbours. Bring animals in before the storm hits. Keep them fed and watered. A hungry animal generates less heat. Water freezes faster than people expect. Buckets must be checked often. These details mattered. Forgetting one could cost more than sleep. The smell grows familiar now, blending with smoke and wool. It becomes part of the cabin's identity. Your breathing slows again. The presence of other living beings steadies you. You're not alone against the cold. The cabin holds more than human life, and that shared vulnerability creates a strange sense of community. There is also the sound of chewing, slow and rhythmic. Hay being worked methodically. The patience of it is soothing. Animals do not worry about tomorrow the way people do. They respond to now. Warmth, food, shelter. That simplicity is contagious if you let it be. You adjust the blanket again, feeling the combined warmth of fire, body and proximity. The wool no longer feels as cold. The storm outside fades into a distant roar, less immediate. Inside, everything has found its place for the night. You think briefly of mornings when animals would be the first to stir, signalling the start of another day. Hooves shifting, soft calls, impatience for food. Their movement would wake the cabin before light did. That is for later. Now they rest, conserving energy just like you. The dog near the door shifts again, nails scraping softly on wood. Then stillness, breath, quiet. The animals have settled. That matters. If they are calm, the night is likely to pass without surprise. You close your eyes fully now, letting the sounds and smells blur into the background. They no longer demand attention. They support you instead, reminders that warmth here is shared, borrowed, multiplied through closeness. Outside, the blizzard continues to test the walls. Inside, life presses together, human and animal, fire and breath, all cooperating without ceremony. In this small space during this long night, survival is not solitary. It is communal, unspoken, and quietly effective. Wrapped in that shared warmth, you drift deeper into sleep, carried forward by the steady presence of other beating hearts nearby. Time stops behaving normally once the storm settles in for good. You notice it first in the way your thoughts stretch. Minutes feel wide, hours lose their edges. The blizzard outside does not move forward so much as it circles, repeating itself with small variations. Wind pours wind again, snow against the wall, snow sliding from the roof. The world beyond the cabin is paused, and inside you begin to mirror that stillness. Blizzards in the 19th century were not just weather events. They were interruptions. Roads disappeared, trails vanished, schedules dissolved. People stopped measuring days by tasks and started measuring them by light hunger and fuel. Night blurred into day when storms lingered and sleep came in fragments rather than blocks. You feel that disorientation now, lying awake without urgency, unsure whether it's early night or deep morning. You close your eyes and try to count time by the fire. Embers brighten then dim. The cycle repeats slowly. Without clocks, this was one of the few ways people gauged passing hours. Some cabins owned timepieces, but cold affected them. Springs tightened. Oil thickened. Clocks lost accuracy or stopped entirely. Many households stopped trusting them during winter storms, relying instead on routine and instinct. The storm outside creates a kind of sensory isolation. Sound is muffled. Light is blocked. Even smells feel contained. The cabin becomes its own small universe disconnected from the wider world. People wrote about this feeling, often describing blizzards as walls rather than conditions. You understand that metaphor now. There is no sense of distance beyond the logs. Everything that matters is here. This kind of confinement changed behaviour. People slept more not because they were lazy, but because movement wasted energy. Eating slowed. Conversation softened. Minds turned inward. Some modern thinkers suggest these enforced pauses shaped winter psychology, deepening reflection but also inviting anxiety. Others argue people adapted smoothly, accepting storms as part of life rather than disruptions. Lying here, you feel both calm and restlessness sharing space. You listen again to the animals nearby, they remain quiet. That steadiness reinforces the sense that nothing urgent needs doing. The fire is stable, the walls hold, food waits. Storms like this demanded patience above all else. Rushing achieved nothing. Waiting became a skill. Children struggled with this more than adults. Their energy had nowhere to go. In some cabins, games and chores were invented simply to pass time. Shelling corn, mending clothes, telling the same stories again and again. At night, exhaustion finally claimed them. Sleep came hard, but deep, shaped by boredom as much as cold. You feel your own thoughts looping. Memories surface, then drift away. The mind fills space when the world shrinks. People once believed blizzards encouraged strange dreams or heavy thoughts. Whether that belief came from coincidence or genuine psychological effect is unclear, but many wrote about dreaming vividly during long storms. Your own dreams hover at the edge, waiting for you to let go. The storm also changes risk. If something goes wrong, help is not coming. That knowledge hums quietly beneath everything. It sharpens awareness even as it encourages rest. There is no benefit in worrying about tomorrow when tomorrow is unreachable. Survival becomes about maintaining the present moment. You adjust your position again, careful not to disturb warmth. The bed feels like a small island in a frozen sea. The cabin creaks softly, settling under the weight of snow. That sound would have alarmed you earlier. Now it feels routine. Your body has recalibrated to storm time. People learned to read blizzards not just by wind, but by duration. A storm that raged fiercely but briefly was different from one that lingered. Lingering storms tested supplies and patience. They demanded planning without action. That tension shaped long winter nights, filling them with quiet calculation. How much wood remains? How much food? How long can this last? You do not know those answers tonight, and you let that be. The firelight flickers, then steadies. The animals breathe. The person beside you shifts and settles. Everything necessary continues. That continuity is enough. Outside, snow keeps falling, erasing tracks, smoothing edges, pressing the world into stillness. Inside, time thickens, becoming something you sit within rather than move through. Sleep arrives in waves, not a single pull. You drift, wake, briefly drift again. This is how storms stop clocks. Not by breaking them, but by making them irrelevant. You exist now in a stretch of time defined by shelter and warmth, not by hours. The blizzard has claimed the world outside, and inside the cabin you accept its terms. Your breathing slows further. Thoughts soften. The need to mark time fades. There will be a morning eventually, but it does not need your attention yet. For now, the storm has folded the night around you, holding you in place. Wrapped in stillness, you sink deeper into sleep, letting time dissolve into the quiet rhythm of wind, fire, and breath. You open your eyes to darkness that feels thick, almost physical. The fire has burned lower, and without its full glow, the cabin shrinks inward. Corners disappear, shapes lose definition. Night here is not an absence of light so much as a presence of shadow. You know where everything is by memory, now not sight. The table, the door, the hearth, all mapped in your mind. Light in cabins like this was always rationed. Candles existed, but they were precious. Each one represented rendered fat, careful pouring time spent. Burning one overnight was unthinkable unless there was illness or fear strong enough to justify the cost. Oil lamps were not common in early rural homes, and when they were oil itself was not guaranteed. Firelight did most of the work, and when the fire dimmed, darkness claimed the rest. You blink slowly, letting your eyes adjust. The faint glow of embers paints the room in deep reds and browns. Shadows stretch long and still. They no longer jump as wildly as before. This quieter darkness feels heavier, more intimate. Sounds become clearer in its absence. The wind outside, the low breath of animals, the steady breathing beside you. People plan their evenings around light. Work ended when sight failed. Reading when possible was done close to flame, often straining eyes, already tired from daylight labour. Many simply stopped doing anything that required precision. Night became a time for rest talk or quiet thought. Darkness shaped daily rhythms more strictly than any clock. You notice how the shadows play tricks when you are tired. A hanging coat looks like a person standing still. A bundle of tools becomes something watchful. Your mind fills gaps automatically. People in the past were keenly aware of this. Stories of apparitions and nighttime fears often centered around half-seen shapes and flickering firelight. Whether these stories were believed literally or used as cautionary tales varied from household to household. You turned slightly, angling your face toward the last light. Even that small movement feels deliberate. In full darkness, you would hesitate more. Darkness demands caution. You do not want to knock something over or stumble if you need to move. People learn to navigate cabins by touch alone, counting steps, memorizing textures. The edge of the table, the smoothness of the door, the warmth near the hearth. Outside, the blizzard reflects no light back inside. Snow usually brightens night, but heavy storms swallow even moonlight. The world beyond the logs might as well be empty. That isolation presses inward, making the cabin feel like the only place that exists. For some, this was comforting. For others, it fed unease. You feel that tension now. The darkness wraps around you, close but not hostile. You breathe slowly, grounding yourself in familiar sensations. The weight of blankets, the warmth of another body, the faint heat still rising from stone. These are anchors. Light may be limited, but touch and sound remain. Children were often afraid of nights like this. Darkness combined with wind and strange noises stirred imaginations easily. Adults responded in different ways, some reassured softly, others distracted with stories or songs. Some believed fear itself was something to be endured and outgrown. There was no single approach. Each family carried its own habits into the dark. You think briefly of how long winter nights lasted. In northern regions, darkness stretched for hours, arriving early and leaving late. People adapted by sleeping more, waking in the night, then sleeping again. This broken sleep pattern was common, even expected. Waking in the dark did not signal insomnia. It was simply part of the night. The fire shifts again, sending a brief pulse of light across the room. For a moment, everything sharpens. Then it fades. You let it go. The darkness returns steady and deep. There is a quiet comfort in knowing nothing is expected of you right now. No work, no movement. Darkness excuses stillness. It invites rest. Even worry feels slower here, dulled by lack of stimulation. You close your eyes again, though it makes little difference. The darkness behind your lids matches the room. Your thoughts drift unanchored by visual cues. Images form and dissolve without urgency. Sleep deepens, not pulled by exhaustion alone, but guided by the natural ebb of light. Outside, the storm continues unseen. Inside, the cabin holds its breath wrapped in shadow. Darkness is no longer something to push against. It is part of the shelter as necessary as walls and fire. You sink into it willingly now, letting the night do what it has always done best. Quiet the world, narrow it, make rest possible. With the last embers glowing softly and the dark filling every corner, you drift onward, carried by the slow, patient rhythm of winter night. You hear a voice before you realize it is meant for you. Low, steady, unhurried. It rises just enough to sit above the wind, then settles again. Someone is telling a story, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to keep the darkness from closing in too tightly. Stories mattered on nights like this. They filled space that would otherwise be claimed by worry or boredom. People told the same ones over and over, smoothing them with repetition until they fit the room perfectly. You recognize this one even if you have not heard it before. A journey delayed by snow, a narrow escape, a clever decision made just in time. The details are less important than the rhythm. You lie still and listen. The voice pauses occasionally, allowing the fire to speak, letting the wind have its say. This is not performance, it is maintenance. Keeping minds occupied, keeping fear from wandering too far. In cabins across winter landscapes, stories carried people through long nights as surely as firewood did. The stories often drew from real events. People talked about storms that trapped travellers for days, about neighbours who survived by digging tunnels through snow, about mistakes that should not be repeated. These accounts served as lessons without instruction. You absorbed them simply by listening, storing them away for a time when they might matter. Sometimes stories drifted toward the strange, tales of lights seen in storms, of voices carried on the wind, of animals behaving oddly before weather changed. Whether these were believed outright or enjoyed as suspense is hard to separate. Belief and entertainment blended easily in the dark. What mattered was that the mind stayed engaged. You notice how the storyteller never rushes, silence is allowed. Pauses stretch comfortably. This pacing is intentional, even if unspoken. People learned that quiet moments let listeners relax, let eyes close without missing anything important. The story does not demand attention, it offers it. Children often drifted off first, their breathing slowing as familiar phrases washed over them. Adults followed more gradually, holding on to the thread just a little longer. You feel that pull now. Your body remains warm and still, while your thoughts soften, loosening their grip on the room. Some stories were practical. How to find direction when landmarks disappear. How to tell whether ice will hold. How to keep a fire alive in high wind. Others were purely for comfort. Tales of summer fields, of meals shared long ago, of places untouched by snow. Memory itself became a kind of warmth. You smile faintly at a gentle aside in the story, a small humour, dry and understated. Humour travelled well in winter. It required no resources and lifted spirits without effort. Many accounts from the time mentioned laughter during storms, not because conditions were easy, but because laughter made them bearable. As the story continues, your attention drifts in and out. You catch fragments, a name, a place, a decision. The rest slides past you like snow off the roof. This half-listening state is familiar. It is where sleep begins to take over, but you're not fully gone yet. The voice softens further as if sensing this. Words slow, sentences shorten. Eventually the story reaches a place where it can pause indefinitely. No grand ending, no resolution, just a natural stopping point. That is how stories survive winter. They do not finish, they wait. The fire crackles quietly approving. Outside the storm rumbles on indifferent. Inside the sound of the voice fades into the background, merging with breath and flame. You no longer distinguish between them. There were nights when stories ran out, when exhaustion silenced everyone. There were other nights when one story led to another until dawn crept in unnoticed. Both were acceptable. What mattered was that no one was left alone with their thoughts too long. You feel your eyes close fully now. The last thing you register is the rhythm of speech dissolving into silence. The absence does not feel empty. It feels earned. The story has done its work. Wrapped in warmth and words, you slip deeper into sleep. The night continues without demanding anything further. Stormfire breath and memory carry on together and you drift with them, held gently in the space stories leave behind. You become aware of a smaller presence long before it makes a sound, a slight shift in weight, a faint sigh, a body that does not quite know how to stay still yet. Children sleep differently in the cold. Their movements are less controlled, their need for reassurance more immediate. Even in deep rest, they drift seeking warmth, contact something solid to press against. You feel a small foot brush your leg, then settle there as if it belongs. No one comments, no one needs to. This is how nights work here. Children migrate in their sleep, pulled by instinct toward heat and familiarity. Beds expand and contract as needed. Order bends without breaking. Winter nights were especially demanding for the young. Smaller bodies lose heat faster, and fear finds them more easily. The wind sounds louder to ears that have not yet learned its patterns. Shadows stretch into monsters. Adults responded with proximity rather than explanation. You keep children close. You let them feel breath and heartbeat. Words come later, if at all. You remember how children were dressed for bed. Extra layers, sometimes too many. Sleeves pulled down over hands, caps tied snugly under chins, blankets tucked tight. Caregivers check them more often during the night, feeling foreheads, adjusting covers, listening for coughing. Illness was always a worry in winter. Cold did not cause sickness on its own, but it weakened bodies enough to invite it. Some families believed children should sleep between adults in the coldest weather. Others placed them against the warmest wall or closest to the hearth. Practices varied, shaped by belief experience and the number of bodies in the room. What remained constant was attention. Even in sleep, adults stayed alert to changes in breathing or movement. You feel a small hand curl into the fabric of your sleeve fingers, clumsy with sleep. The grip tightens, then relaxes. That simple contact steadies the child, and you feel your own breathing slow in response. Warmth flows both ways. Shared heat matters more when one body cannot generate enough on its own. Children often woke crying during storms, startled by sound or darkness. Comfort came quickly. A murmur, a touch, a familiar phrase. There was no expectation that fear should be faced alone. Night was not a test. It was something to get through together. You think briefly of how winter shaped childhood memories. Long nights, confined spaces, stories repeated endlessly. These experiences stayed with people long after they left cabins behind. Some recalled them with fondness, others with relief that they were over. Memory softened edges or sharpened them depending on what came after. The child beside you shifts again, nestling closer. Their breathing evens out. The storm no longer reaches them. That is the goal. You adjust the blankets slightly, making sure no cold air sneaks in. The movement is practiced almost unconscious. There were nights when children slept through storms entirely exhausted by the effort of staying warm during the day. Other nights they woke often, restless and uncomfortable. Caregivers adapted. Sleep became flexible. Interrupted rest was better than risk. You hear a faint cough somewhere in the room, then quiet. A reminder that winter was hard on lungs and throats. Steam from boiling water, herbal drinks, and careful warmth were used to ease discomfort. Not everything worked. People learned which remedies help through trial, rumour and hope. The child's warmth spread slowly, a small but meaningful addition to the shared space. You feel it along your side, steady and alive. This closeness anchors you. Responsibility settles gently, not as burden, but as purpose. Outside, the storm continues its work. Inside, the smallest bodies are protected by layers of cloth, wood and care. That care is not loud or dramatic. It is constant. It hums quietly beneath sleep. You close your eyes again, aware of the child's presence, but not disturbed by it. Their breathing becomes part of the room's rhythm, joining fire and wind and animals in a quiet chorus. The night deepens, but here warmth holds. Wrapped in shared heat and unspoken vigilance, you drift again. The storm can rage as it likes. Inside, the smallest among you sleep, and that is enough to carry the night forward. You wake with a dull ache that seems to have settled into your bones while you slept. Not sharp pain, just heaviness. A stiffness in the joints, a thickness in the chest that makes each breath feel more deliberate. Cold does that. It sinks slowly, working its way inward, especially when bodies rest too long without movement. Winter sickness was a constant concern in places like this. People spoke of chills, agues, winter coughs, fevers that arrived quietly and refused to leave. Without modern medicine, symptoms were watched closely. A cough was not just a cough. It was a question. Would it pass, or would it deepen into something dangerous? You shift slightly and stretch an arm, careful not to wake anyone. The movement sends a brief flare of discomfort through your shoulder, then eases as warmth returns. People learn to move gently in the cold, especially at night. Sudden motions could strain muscles that had stiffened in low temperatures. Morning aches were expected. Lingering weakness was not. You listen to the breathing around you. Steady. Even. That is reassuring. One by one you register the sounds. The person beside you exhales slowly. A child sighs in sleep. Animals breathe in their own rhythm beyond the wall. No wheezing, no laboured gasps. For now everyone is all right. Cold air dries throats and irritates lungs. Smoke adds to the burden. People drank warm liquids to soothe irritation. Teas made from dried leaves or roots gathered months earlier. Broth simmered when fuel allowed. Plain hot water when nothing else was available. These drinks did more than hydrate. They comforted. They signalled care. You think about how illness changed nights. When someone was sick, sleep became lighter, more fragmented. Fires were tended more closely. Water warmed more often. Someone stayed awake listening for changes. Cabins were small and sickness did not stay private. Everyone felt it, shared it, worried over it. There were beliefs about cold and illness that shaped behaviour. Some thought cold air itself caused sickness. Others blamed dampness, bad humours or exhaustion. Even without agreement on cause, people recognised patterns. Warmth helped. Rest helped. Fresh air helped, but only in careful doses. Balancing these elements required attention, especially during storms. You clear your throat quietly. The sound feels louder in the stillness. You wait, noticing whether it triggers pain or coughing. It does not. The heaviness remains, but it does not worsen. That matters. Bodies in winter often hovered on the edge between discomfort and illness. Crossing that line depended on rest, nutrition and chance. Children were watched especially closely. Their fevers rose faster. Their energy dropped suddenly. Caregivers learned to read subtle signs. A child too quiet, too warm, too cold. Nights were when these signs became most apparent. Sleep revealed what waking activity could hide. You remember remedies passed along through families, poultices warmed near the fire, cloths soaked in hot water and laid on chests, onion syrup, honey when available. Some helped, some did nothing. The act of trying mattered almost as much as the outcome. Doing something restored a sense of control. There is evidence in letters and journals that winter illnesses shaped how people thought about the season itself. Winter was not just cold. It was a time of vulnerability. Survival meant more than staying warm. It meant staying strong enough to greet spring. You adjust the blanket again, easing pressure on your shoulder. The ache fades slightly. Your body relaxes back into the bed. Rest is the best remedy available right now. People knew this instinctively. When storms forced stillness, rest followed whether welcomed or not. Outside, the blizzard continues indifferent to aches and fears. Inside the cabin shelters bodies that carry the marks of cold in subtle ways. Stiffness, dry throats, slow movements. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of endurance. You take a deeper breath now, testing it. It feels easier. Warmth has done its quiet work. The fire hums softly. The animals remain calm. No coughing breaks the night. That is enough reassurance to let your guard down again. As sleep returns, the ache dulls, further retreating to the background. Morning will bring movement, heat, and food, all of which will help. For now, rest is the medicine. Wrapped in layers and shared warmth, you allow your body to settle, trusting that this night will pass as so many others have one careful breath at a time. Sleep comes in layers tonight, and dreams rise from it like mist. You drift in and out, never fully leaving the cabin, never fully waking. When images form, they borrow heavily from the storm. White stretches without edges. Wind moves things that should not move. Sounds arrive before shapes. Your mind does not need much imagination. The night has already done the work. People once believed that weather pressed itself into dreams, shaping them the way cold shapes breath. Storm nights were thought to bring heavier sleep or stranger visions, depending on who you asked. Whether that belief grew from pattern or poetry hardly matters. Lying here wrapped in warmth and noise, you feel how the storm seeps inward, blurring the line between outside and inside. You dream of walking through snow that rises higher with every step. Your legs move slowly, weighed down by something unseen. There is no panic, just effort. The sensation is familiar. It mirrors the way your body rests under layers of blankets and clothing. Weight without pain, resistance without struggle. Your breathing deepens in the dream and in the bed. The two align. Wind in the dream sounds like the wind outside softened by walls and distance. Your mind does not distinguish carefully. It has no reason to. Everything is connected by rhythm. In another moment you're back in the cabin, but it is brighter. Firelight stretches farther. The storm is quieter. This is not memory or prediction. It is desire. Dreams often rearranged reality into something more manageable. People spoke of dreaming about summer during winter storms, fields, water, open skies. These images offered relief even when the body remained cold and still. You feel a slight twitch in your hand as the dream shifts. Muscles respond to imagined movement. This startled some people when they noticed it, believing dreams could pull the body too far from rest. Others accepted it as part of sleeping deeply. In shared beds, such movements were common, often ignored unless they disrupted warmth. The dream fades, replaced by darkness and sound. Then another forms quieter this time. You're inside the cabin again, but it is larger, stretching outward without walls. Snow presses at the edges but cannot enter. The space holds. That sense of containment is soothing. Your mind builds shelter just as the cabin does. Nightmares were spoken of cautiously in earlier times. Not every troubling dream was dismissed as imagination. Some were treated as warnings, others as signs of exhaustion. Storm nights were blamed for many uneasy visions, especially when sleep was broken and light scarce. Still, most dreams passed without comment, forgotten by morning. You half awake and feel the weight of the child beside you, the warmth of another body at your back. These sensations ground you, pulling you away from drifting too far. Your dream adjusts to include them. A hand, a familiar presence, safety. Outside, the storm maintains its pace. Inside, your mind mirrors it, repeating patterns, circling familiar ground. Dreams do not move forward tonight. They turn slowly like snowflakes caught in a gentle current. There is a moment where you are aware of dreaming, a thin awareness that floats above the images. You know you are warm. You know the cabin is holding. That knowledge softens everything else. The dream loses its sharp edges and dissolves. You sink deeper into rest, now beyond images, into something quieter. Breathing and heartbeat slow. Muscles relax fully. This is the kind of sleep people rarely noticed until it was gone. It repaired without fanfare. In this deeper space, the storm becomes background vibration rather than sound. Fire becomes warmth rather than light. The body rests in layers of sensation rather than thought. Time loses shape again. You might dream again before morning. You might not. Either way, the night continues doing its work. Storm and sleep weave together, each influencing the other in subtle ways. You float between them, held by wood-cloth breath and shared heat. When dreams return, if they do, they will be softer. When waking comes, it will be gradual. For now, you rest in the space between where nothing is required of you. The storm carries on, the cabin holds. Sleep deepens steady and untroubled, carrying you gently through the long winter night. You wake without opening your eyes, aware of a feeling rather than a sound. It is the absence of something. The storm is still there, but it feels farther away. Or maybe it is you who has drifted inward. Either way, a quiet loneliness settles over the room, not sharp, not frightening, just present. Winter nights like this often stretch the sense of isolation thin. Cabins sat far apart. Roads vanished under snow. Communication slowed to nothing. People could go days without seeing anyone beyond their own household. That distance pressed on the mind as much as the cold pressed on the walls. You feel it now, even surrounded by others. The world feels very small. You listen carefully. Breathing fills the room, soft and human. A child sighs. Someone turns over. The dog near the door shifts and settles again. These sounds anchor you. Loneliness here is not about being alone. It is about knowing how far away everything else has become. People coped with this distance in quiet ways. Letters were read and reread until paper softened and ink faded. Memories were shared aloud, sometimes repeatedly, as if repetition might keep them alive. Names of distant relatives, old neighbours, places left behind. Speaking them felt like touching something beyond the storm. You think of how long winters lasted, and how easily days blurred together. Without visitors, without news, time could feel suspended. Some people welcomed that pause. Others struggled with it deeply. There are accounts of restlessness, of tempers, shortening, of worry growing louder in the dark. Isolation did not affect everyone the same way. You shift slightly, pressing closer to the warmth beside you. Physical closeness counters emotional distance. That was understood instinctively. Shared beds, shared work, shared meals. Togetherness was not just practical, it was protective. You imagine the nearest neighbour, their cabin buried in the same snow, their fire burning low like yours. You imagine them listening to the same wind, wondering about the same morning. This imagined connection eases the tightness in your chest. Even unseen others exist. That knowledge matters. People found small ways to mark connection during storms. A lantern hung briefly in a window before dark. A signal fire when weather cleared. Simple gestures that said we are still here. During the storm itself, imagination did the work. You remember stories of travellers caught alone in blizzards of cabins reached at the last moment. These stories were told often partly as warning, partly as reassurance. Shelter existed. People helped when they could. Survival was not always solitary, even when it felt that way. The storm howls, again louder now, as if reminding you of its reach. The sound fills the space left by wandering thoughts. You let it. Better the voice of wind than the echo of worry. You focus on simple sensations. The blanket against your chin, the slow rise and fall of breath. The steady warmth pooled between bodies. Loneliness softens when attention returns to the present moment. Children sensed isolation too, even if they could not name it. They asked about visitors, about when spring would come, about places they barely remembered. Adults answered patiently or deflected gently. Promises of thaw became a kind of comfort currency. You feel your own thoughts slow as you settle back into the room. The cabin feels less like a point cut off from the world and more like a pause within it. This storm will end. Paths will reappear. Voices will return. For now, waiting is the only task. You turn slightly careful not to wake anyone. The warmth holds. The breathing around you remains steady. The night is not empty. It is simply quiet. As sleep returns, the sense of isolation fades further, replaced by a muted awareness of connection. Others rest nearby. Others endure the same weather beyond the walls. You are part of something larger even when you cannot see it. The storm continues outside, vast and indifferent. Inside you drift again, held by shared space and shared patience. Loneliness loosens its grip, and rest takes over once more, carrying you forward through the long winter night. You wake expecting change, some sign that the storm has moved on. Light, quiet, relief. Instead, you find the same low darkness and the same steady pressure of wind against the walls. For a moment, confusion flickers. You wonder if you slept at all. Time feels folded in on itself, impossible to measure. This was a common disappointment during long winter storms. People woke hoping for morning only to find the world unchanged, still sealed shut by snow and sky. Dawn did not always announce itself clearly. Thick cloud cover erased the usual signals. Even roosters stayed quiet when the light never really arrived. You open your eyes fully now and look toward the window. What little it once showed is gone, filled completely with pale nothing. Snow has pressed itself against the opening, blocking what little view there was. The room feels dimmer than before, as if the night has decided to linger. The fire is lower but not dead. A few embers glow faintly stubbornly. You feel a small surge of relief at that. Fire means continuity. Fire means options. Without it, the day would begin, badly stiff fingers fumbling for flame breath visible inside the cabin. You stretch slowly, testing the air. It is colder now, not sharply so, but noticeably. Bodies have rested. The fire has slept. Cold has crept back in, polite but persistent. This is the moment when people judge the storm's intent. A pause like this could mean the worst was over, or it could mean it was gathering itself for another push. You listen carefully. The wind has not stopped. It has changed character, less violent, more constant. Snow no longer slams into the walls. It settles, slides, presses. This kind of storm could last. You feel that realization settle with a quiet weight. Mourning in conditions like this did not mean movement. It meant assessment. How much wood remains? How much food? How warm is everyone? You begin that inventory instinctively, even before sitting up. The child beside you breathes evenly. The person at your back stirs, then settles. Animals remain quiet, no immediate trouble. You sit up slowly, joints protesting at first, then loosening. The floor will be cold. You hesitate before swinging your legs down, savouring the last of the trapped warmth. People learn to delay that first contact with cold as long as possible. Once heat escaped, it was hard to reclaim. Your feet touch the floor and you wince slightly. Cold travels fast through wood. You pull on extra layers before standing, fully moving carefully so as not to disturb others. Morning tasks begin quietly during storms. Noise wastes energy and unsettles nerves. You move toward the hearth and coax the embers gently. A breath, a shift, a small stick laid just so. Smoke curls upward, thin and hopeful. After a moment, flame answers. It grows slowly, deliberately. You wait. Rushing fire only leads to disappointment. As the fire strengthens, light returns inch by inch. The cabin reappears in fragments. The table, the door, the wall where snow presses so close it seems part of the room. You feel the day begin not with clarity but with persistence. Outside there is no sign of clearing. Snow continues to fall lighter now but steady. Tracks are gone, landmarks erased. Even if the storm eased, later travel would be slow. This was the reality of being snowed in. Not trapped dramatically, but paused. You think about how people measured hope in small ways. A thinning of clouds, a shift in wind, a bird call. None of those are present yet. Still you continue. Fire, warmth, food, rest. These are enough for now. Others begin to stir as the cabin brightens. Quiet movements, soft words. No one asks if the storm is over. The answer is obvious. The question can wait. You stand near the hearth, warming your hands, watching snow drift past the sealed window. Morning has arrived technically, but the world remains closed. You accept that. Patience was not optional in winters like this. It was a skill learned day by day. As warmth spreads again, the disappointment fades. The storm has not ended, but neither has survival. The cabin holds. The fire grows. Another day begins, even if it looks exactly like the night that came before. The second day inside the storm feels heavier than the first. Not colder exactly, but slower. The novelty has worn off and what remains is routine. You feel it as soon as you stand. Movements take more thought. Every action asks whether it is necessary. Snowed in does not mean dramatic confinement. It means quiet calculation. Food becomes part of that calculation early. You glance at the shelves, counting without counting. You know what is there by memory. Cornmeal, dried beans, salted meat wrapped carefully to keep pests away. Maybe a crock of preserved vegetables if last summer was kind. None of it looks urgent yet, but storms teach restraint quickly. You plan meals that warm without wasting fuel. Thin stews, porridge, broth that stretches ingredients and heat alike. People learned this balance over generations. Heavy meals warmed the body but demanded more fuel to cook. Light meals conserved resources but left hunger close at hand. The middle ground was safest. You stir a pot slowly, watching steam rise, letting warmth spread without rushing. The smell fills the cabin, gentle and reassuring. Snow outside continues to fall, but now it does so with purpose rather than fury. This is the kind of weather that lingers. It buries without drama. You know better than to assume tomorrow will be different. Stories of storms that lasted days were not exaggerations. Weather could stall over regions, trapping families longer than expected. People learned not to speak of leaving until they could see the land again. You listen as someone mentions rationing not as a warning but as a reminder. Portions are adjusted slightly. No one complains. Hunger in winter was familiar and mild hunger was preferable to later scarcity. Children are given enough to stay warm and calm. Adults accept a little less without comment. The fire becomes the centre again. Wood is stacked carefully, each piece chosen for burn time rather than size. Softer wood is saved for starting flame. Harder pieces are fed slowly. You notice how often hands return to the hearth, warming, checking, adjusting. Fire is a conversation that never fully ends. Outside the world is erased. No horizon, no depth, just white layered on white. Even sound seems flattened. You imagine how far the snow has drifted. Doors buried, paths gone. Digging out will take time and time costs energy. No one suggests trying yet. Inside, repairs occupy hands. A crack in the chinking is pressed with fresh mud. A loose peg is hammered back into place. These tasks are small, but they matter. Storms reveal weaknesses quickly. Fixing them now prevents bigger problems later. You work quietly, careful not to waste warmth. People often underestimated how much labour snowed-in days required. Not physical exertion, but maintenance. Keeping things from getting worse. Drying damp clothes, shaking straw bedding, checking animals, clearing ice from water containers. None of it dramatic. All of it essential. There is a sense of waiting that settles over everything, waiting for light, waiting for quiet, waiting for change. It could feel oppressive, but it can also feel restful if accepted. You find yourself moving more slowly, speaking less. The storm has set the pace, and resisting it only brings frustration. Children ask when they can go outside again. The answer is gentle but vague. Soon, later, when it clears. These words are elastic. They stretch to fit the weather. Disappointment flickers, then fades as attention shifts to something else. A game, a story, a chore that feels important. You glance again at the door, half buried now. Snow presses against it firmly. Opening it would be work. Closing it again would be harder. The cold beyond is not inviting. Staying in is not defeat. It is strategy. As evening approaches, if it can be called, that the cabin grows dimmer again. The fire is fed. Supper is shared. The same simple foods taste better the second day, warmed by familiarity. Hunger sharpens flavors. Comfort lowers expectations. You feel tired earlier than you expect. Snowed-in days compress energy. Without variation, the body turns inward. Sleep comes more easily deeper. You prepare the bed again, layering straw and blankets, settling into patterns established the night before. Outside, snow continues to fall, patient and thorough. Inside, life narrows to what fits within walls and warmth. The second day does not bring drama or relief. It brings endurance. You accept it without ceremony. As you lie down, listening to the steady hush beyond the logs, you understand that being snowed in is not about waiting to be rescued. It is about continuing carefully and quietly until the world decides to open again. Wrapped in routine and shared resolve, you drift into another long night, letting the storm do what it will while you do what you must. Cold has a way of finding the smallest weaknesses. You notice them now that the storm has settled into a long stay. A thin line of frost along one corner, a faint drip where melting snow has worked its way through the roof and down a beam. Nothing urgent yet, but enough to demand attention. Winter repairs are never ideal, but waiting can make things worse. You gather what you need quietly, a handful of straw, some packed mud kept inside for just this reason, a scrap of cloth. Cabins were maintained constantly, especially in winter. Materials were kept close because storms rarely announced when they would test the structure. You press the mud into a widening crack, smoothing it with cold fingers until the draft softens. It is not elegant, but it will hold. Leaks are trickier. Water inside a cabin in winter is an enemy that arrives disguised as a nuisance. It drips, freezes, expands, and breaks what it touches. You trace the path of moisture, carefully watching how it darkens the wood. A small pan is placed beneath to catch drops. That buys time. Fixing the source will have to wait until the roof is accessible. People learn to live with temporary solutions. Perfection was rare. Function was the goal. A cloth tied around a beam, a wedge tapped into a gap, a board shifted slightly to redirect meltwater. These adjustments were made with calm focus, not frustration. Energy spent on anger was energy wasted. You feel the temperature shift near the repaired crack. The air no longer slides across your ankle. That small victory matters. In cabins, comfort was built from dozens of these moments stacked carefully on top of one another. The storm outside does not pause for your work. Snow continues to settle, adding weight to the roof. You listen for creaks that sound different from the usual settling. Most are harmless. Some demand a closer look. You move carefully, testing each step. Falls inside cabins were common during winter, especially when floors grew slick from melted snow and tracked ice. Tools are simple but familiar. A hammer worn smooth at the handle, nails bent and straightened more than once. Every object has been repaired as often as the cabin itself. Waste was not an option. Broken did not mean useless. You notice how quiet everyone else has become while you work. No one interrupts unless necessary. Repairs are given space. There is an unspoken understanding that keeping the shelter intact is shared responsibility, even if only one person's hands are moving. Outside, the wind pushes snow into new shapes against the walls. Inside, you push back where you can. This exchange continues all winter. Weather tests, people respond, not with force, but with persistence. When you finish, you step back and assess. The room feels steadier, not warmer but more secure. That sense of stability eases tension you did not realize you were carrying. Shelter is not just physical, it is psychological. You wash your hands in cold water, shaking off excess quickly before it numbs your fingers. Drying happens near the fire, slow and careful. You flex your hands, restoring circulation. Small aches bloom, then fade. There will be more repairs before winter ends. There always are. Each one leaves its mark, layers of effort visible to anyone who looks closely. Mud lines, patched boards, mismatched materials. These are not signs of neglect. They are signs of survival. As evening returns, the cabin settles again into its rhythm. The repaired spots hold. The leaks drip into waiting pans. The fire glows steadily. You sit down, tired in a satisfying way, knowing you've pushed back just enough for today. Outside, the storm continues its patient work. Inside, the cabin stands imperfect but resilient. You have done what could be done. The rest belongs to time, weather, and tomorrow. As night settles again, you notice the work that never announces itself. It happens quietly, almost invisibly woven into the hours between tasks and rest. Someone has already shaken out the bedding, redistributing straw so it does not bunch too thin in one place. Damp clothes have been shifted closer to the fire, then farther away, careful not to scorch. A pot has been rinsed and set upside down to dry, even though it will be needed again in the morning. Much of this labour belongs to women, though no one here would name it that way. It is simply what must be done. Winter magnifies these routines. Cold shortens tempers and margins. Forgetting one small thing can ripple outward, turning inconvenience into danger. So the work continues steady and precise, even when bodies are tired. You watch hands move by firelight, practiced and economical. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. Food is portioned with an eye toward tomorrow, not just tonight. Scraps are saved. Ashes sifted, not thrown away, kept for cleaning or fire tending. Even water is reused carefully, a rinse becoming wash water, then ice to be melted again later. At night, this labour shifts tone. It becomes quieter, almost meditative. There is comfort in repetition, folding, stirring, checking. These actions anchor the mind, keeping worry from wandering too far. People spoke less during these moments, not out of tension, but out of shared understanding. You notice how children are guided gently through small tasks even at this hour. A blanket handed over. A cup carried carefully. Learning happens in moments like these, not through instruction but participation. Winter nights were classrooms without walls. Skills passed hand to hand, watched rather than explained. Fatigue sits close, but it does not stop the work. Instead, it smooths it. Movement slow, but accuracy improves. There is no room for carelessness. A spill means ice. A dropped ember means danger. Attention sharpens even as energy wanes. You think about how this work rarely appears in records. Letters mention outcomes, not processes. Meals happened. Clothes were clean enough. Children survived. The quiet effort behind those facts is easy to overlook. Yet without it, nothing else holds. As the fire is banked again for the night, someone checks the door, pressing a boot into the gap to block drafts. Another person adjusts a shawl around a sleeping child without waking them. These gestures are small, but they stack up, forming a barrier against the cold as real as the walls themselves. The storm outside remains relentless. Inside, order is maintained through care rather than force. That distinction matters. Winter does not reward strength alone, it rewards attention. You settle back onto the bed as the last tasks wind down. The room feels calmer now, not because the storm has eased, but because everything that can be done has been done, the rest must wait. As sleep approaches again, you carry with you the awareness that survival here is not only about endurance, it is about maintenance. The quiet nightly labour that keeps the cabin functioning, the people warm the morning possible. Wrapped in that knowledge and the steady warmth it creates, you drift off once more while the storm continues outside unanswered but held at bay. You notice it in the way someone moves toward the door even though there is nowhere to go. A restlessness quiet but unmistakable. The storm has been pressing for days now, and endurance begins to take on a different shape. For some, especially men raised to measure themselves against land and weather, stillness feels like failure. Doing nothing feels heavier than cold. You hear a low comment about the wind, about how it sounds like it might be easing, even though everyone knows it is not. This is not denial, it is habit. Talking about the weather is a way of engaging with it, of standing up to something that cannot be fought directly. Pride does not always roar. Sometimes it mutters. In many households, winter changed the balance of visible work. Outdoor labour slowed or stopped. Chopping wood continued when possible, but fields slept under snow. Traps were checked less often. Travel ceased. Men who spent much of the year moving now found themselves confined, sharing space and time more closely than usual. Some adapted easily, others struggled. You see hands flex unconsciously as if reaching for tools that are not needed tonight. Repairing the cabin, checking animals, stacking wood again, even when the pile is already neat. These tasks are done and redone, partly for necessity, partly for reassurance. Movement feels like control. Stories passed between men often reflected this tension. Tales of surviving worse storms, of journeys made when others stayed put. These stories were not boasts so much as reminders of identity. Winter threatened not just comfort but self-image. Endurance became a measure of worth. You sense a careful balance being maintained. No one pushes too hard. No one mocks the need to act. The storm demands patience, but patience looks different to different people. The cabin makes room for that. A quiet trip to check the door again. A slow walk to the wall to feel for drafts already sealed. These gestures are allowed. You think about how expectation shapes behaviour. Strength was valued, but so was restraint. Recklessness in a blizzard was not admired. Surviving winter required knowing when to wait. That lesson did not always come easily. The fire draws attention again. Someone adjusts a log even though it does not need it. The flame flares briefly, then settles. Satisfied, the hand withdraws. This small interaction seems to ease something unspoken. You feel the weight of the storm on everyone, not just physically, but emotionally. Pride, worry, responsibility all bundled together. Men were often expected to protect, to provide, to decide. When weather removed those options, the role did not disappear. It shifted inward. Silence follows, not awkward. Companionable. The kind that allows thoughts to settle without challenge. The storm outside continues indifferent to human definitions of strength. Eventually rest wins. Muscles loosen, shoulders drop. The need to prove anything fades into the background. Survival tonight does not require heroics. It requires sleep. You lie back, feeling the cabin steady around you. Pride does not vanish, but it softens, reshaped by circumstance. Endurance here is quiet. It looks like staying put. It looks like trusting walls and fire and each other to hold through one more night. As sleep returns, the storm no longer feels like an opponent. It feels like a test already being passed slowly and without spectacle. Wrapped in that understanding, you drift onward, letting rest do what strength alone cannot. You notice small details that do not quite match the stories settlers like to tell about self-reliance. A way the fire is banked that feels deliberate rather than improvised. The angle of the roof. The choice to pack snow against certain walls instead of clearing it away. These habits did not appear from nowhere. They were learned, observed, adapted, and quietly kept. Long before log cabins dotted these landscapes, people already knew how to live through winters like this. They understood wind patterns, snow behavior, animal movement, and the way cold settles into valleys. Much of that knowledge was shared, sometimes freely, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes without credit. Tonight, as you lie warm because of decisions made generations ago, that lineage is present whether anyone names it or not. You remember how the door faces away from the worst of the wind, how the fire burns low and steady instead of roaring, how bedding is layered rather than piled randomly. These choices mirror techniques used by indigenous communities who lived here long before cabins existed. Shelter was not about domination over nature, it was about cooperation with it. Some settlers paid close attention. They watched how snow was used as insulation rather than treated as an enemy. They learned which trees burned cleanest, which produced too much smoke, which should be avoided indoors. They noticed how food was stored, how clothing was layered, how movement was conserved during storms. Others ignored this knowledge and paid for it quickly. You think about how these lessons travelled, sometimes through direct teaching, sometimes through imitation, sometimes through observation from a distance. Not every exchange was respectful, not every lesson was acknowledged, yet the practices endured because they worked. Even tonight, the way you remain still during the storm reflects this influence. Conservation of energy, listening rather than acting, waiting rather than forcing change. These ideas ran counter to many European traditions of land use, but proved essential in extreme climates. You feel the snow packed along the wall holding warmth inside. That method existed long before mud chinking was common. Snow was shaped into walls, roofs, windbreaks. It was not waste, it was material. Understanding that changed survival odds dramatically. Food choices reflect this inheritance too. Dried meat, stews that stretch calories, broths that warm without exhausting fuel. These were not inventions of desperation. They were refined over centuries in places where winter ruled half the year. There were moments of resistance. Some settlers dismissed local knowledge as superstition or weakness. Those attitudes rarely survived their first hard winter. Nature was an unforgiving teacher, but a consistent one. Lessons learned were rarely forgotten. You think about how history often tells these stories unevenly. Names are lost, origins blurred, techniques absorbed and rebranded. Yet the cabin around you is a composite of many hands and minds across time. Survival here is collective even when it is remembered as individual. The storm outside does not care where knowledge comes from. It only responds to whether decisions are sound. Tonight they are. The fire burns efficiently, the walls hold, warmth remains. You settle deeper into the bed, aware that what keeps you safe is not just wood and flame, but accumulated understanding passed quietly across cultures and generations. The night feels steadier for that reason. As sleep returns, you carry this awareness without ceremony. No need to name it, no need to resolve it. The knowledge is already at work, shaping warmth, shaping rest, shaping survival. Wrapped in that quiet inheritance, you drift onward, while the storm continues, held at bay by lessons learned long before this cabin was ever built. The storm does not invite prayer, but it often provokes it. You feel the impulse rise quietly, not dramatic or urgent, just present. In a night like this, thoughts drift toward forces beyond wood and fire. Not because anyone expects miracles, but because naming fear gives it shape, and shaping it makes it easier to live with. You hear a murmur nearby. Not a full prayer spoken aloud, more a habit of words breathed softly, almost unconsciously. Some people learned these phrases as children and never questioned them. Others adopted them later after a winter taught them how small they were. Faith here is practical. It does not demand certainty. It offers steadiness. Winter bred rituals that blurred belief and routine. A charm hung near the door, a phrase spoken before sleep, a sign scratched into a beam long ago. These acts did not replace preparation, they accompanied it. Fire still had to be tended, food still rationed, a wall still repaired. Belief did not excuse effort, it simply sat alongside it. You remember how storms were once read as messages, not always punishment, sometimes warning, sometimes reminder. Snow arriving early or staying late carried meaning for those who depended on the land. People watched patterns closely, looking for signs of what the season might hold. Whether those interpretations were accurate mattered less than the sense of engagement they created. Children absorbed these beliefs without question. They learned which words were spoken during storms and which were saved for calm nights. They learned which gestures were meant to protect and which to comfort. Fear softened when wrapped in ritual. Even small acts carried weight when repeated enough times. You notice a mark carved into the wood near the hearth. Old, worn smooth by years of hands passing over it. It might have been a tally. It might have been a symbol. Its meaning is unclear now, but its presence remains. People left signs for reasons they trusted at the time, even if those reasons faded later. There were debates even then. Some dismissed these practices as foolish. Others held to them fiercely. Many did both depending on the night. A person could laugh at superstition in daylight and still whisper a prayer when wind shook the roof hard enough. Contradiction lived comfortably in winter cabins. You feel your own thoughts slow as you focus on the familiar rhythm of breath. In and out, steady. This too is a ritual, even if no one names it. Focusing on breath grounds, you pulls attention away from imagined dangers. People did not need formal meditation to understand this. They practiced it without realizing. Outside, the storm continues with the same indifference it always has. Inside, meaning is layered onto it anyway. That is what people do. They tell stories about weather because weather shapes their lives. They assign it intention because intention feels easier to face than randomness. You do not ask for the storm to end. That feels unrealistic. Instead, the quiet wish is simpler. Let the fire hold. Let the wall stay firm. Let morning come when it comes. These are not grand requests. They are practical hopes shaped by experience. As sleep returns, any words you formed fade away. They have done their job. The act of thinking them has settled something inside you. Whether belief made a difference or not is beside the point. Calm has value on its own. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb warmth. The cabin feels steady. The storm sounds the same. Nothing has changed, yet something has eased. Fear has found a place to sit without taking over. Wrapped in warmth, routine, and quiet faith in whatever keeps mornings arriving, you drift back into sleep. Outside, snow falls. Inside, belief rests alongside fire and breath, another small thing that helps the night pass. Something has changed in your body, even if the storm outside feels exactly the same. You notice it when you shift and the cold does not bite as sharply as it did the first night. Your muscles still ache, but they loosen faster. Your breath no longer fogs quite as dramatically. This is not comfort, it is adjustment. Human bodies are remarkably quick learners when circumstances refuse to change. After days of cold sleep and careful movement, your system recalibrates. Blood flow favours the core. Extremities complain less loudly. Shivering waits longer before announcing itself. You're not warmer in any absolute sense, but you are less shocked by the cold you meet. People living through winters like this spoke about hardening, though not always with pride. It was more an observation than a boast. The cold felt different after a while. Less like an enemy, more like a condition that had to be negotiated daily. Those who survived long winters often said the first nights were the worst, not because temperatures were lower, but because the body had not yet learned what to expect. You pull the blanket aside briefly to test the air. It feels cool, but manageable. Earlier, this same air would have sent you scrambling to cover up again. Now you pause, you breathe, then you settle back in. That pause is new. It signals adaptation. Sleep improves too. The first night demanded constant attention. Every sound, every draft pulled you toward wakefulness. Now your body filters more efficiently. It lets go sooner. It trusts that most noises are harmless. This trust is not foolish, it is trained. You think about how children adapt even faster. They complain less by the second or third night, their body's quick to reset expectations. Adults take longer, they carry memories of warmth that interfere with acceptance. Letting go of those comparisons is part of adjusting. The way you move has changed as well. Gestures are smaller, steps are deliberate, you no longer waste motion. Energy feels like a resource now, something to be managed rather than spent freely. This efficiency carries into rest. You shift less, you hold warmth longer. There were people who believed exposure strengthened the body in lasting ways. Cold baths, sleeping in unheated rooms, minimal bedding. Whether these practices helped or harmed depended on many factors, but the idea itself reveals something important. People noticed that bodies could change, that tolerance could grow. You feel that tolerance now, not dramatic, subtle. It shows up in the way you can lie still without constantly adjusting, in the way your breathing remains slow even when the fire dips. You're still alert but not tense. This adjustment does not mean safety. Overconfidence in cold is dangerous. People knew that too. Acclimation had limits, and those limits were sometimes crossed with fatal results. The trick was learning where your own line sat and respecting it. Tonight you stay on the safe side of that line. You keep layers on. You stay close to warmth. You listen to your body without challenging it unnecessarily. Adaptation works best when paired with caution. The storm outside continues to press against the cabin unchanged by your internal shifts. Snow still falls, wind still tests the walls. Yet your experience of it is different. Less raw, more contained. You settle deeper into the bed, feeling the straw give in familiar places. Your body molds itself into the space with less resistance now. The cabin feels less foreign, more like an extension of you. This is how people endured winters that stretched on for months, not by conquering the cold, but by slowly adjusting to it night after night until it became part of the background rather than the focus. The cold never left. Attention shifted. As sleep returns again, it carries you more smoothly this time. Dreams come gently or not at all. Your body rests more fully confident in its new equilibrium. The storm may last. The night may be long, but you're no longer meeting it for the first time. Wrapped in layers habit and a body that has learned what to expect, you drift onward. The cold is still there. You're simply better at living alongside it now. You notice it in the way your thoughts stretch forward for the first time. Not urgently, not optimistically, just gently. Spring. The idea forms without pressure like a word spoken under your breath. No one says it aloud yet. It is too early for that. But it exists now, faint and persistent, resting somewhere behind the sound of the wind. People living through winters like this learned not to count days, but they did mark shifts. The quality of light when it appeared, the way snow settled instead of falling hard, the behavior of animals once storms began to space themselves farther apart. These were not guarantees. They were hints, and hints were enough to keep endurance alive. You lie still and imagine thaw not as warmth, but as movement. Water dripping from eaves, doors opening without resistance, paths reappearing slowly, imperfectly. The image feels distant but not impossible. That matters. Winter becomes harder when the future feels closed. Inside the cabin, small signs of forward motion already exist. Supplies have lasted longer than feared. Repairs are holding, bodies have adapted. Even the routines have softened, no longer frantic, more confident. These are quiet victories rarely celebrated, but deeply felt. You think about how people once spoke of winter as something to be waited out rather than fought. Survival did not mean progress. It meant continuity, reaching the next season intact. That mindset shaped long nights like this one, encouraging patience over force. Children sometimes asked what spring would bring. Adults answered carefully, not with promises, but with possibilities. Planting, travel, visitors. work that happened outdoors again. Naming these things kept them real without tempting disappointment. You feel the bed warm beneath you, shaped now by days of use. The cabin smells familiar, no longer sharp with smoke or damp. Familiarity itself becomes a form of comfort. When something no longer surprises you, it stops draining energy. Outside, the storm still rules, but it feels less absolute. Even if snow continues to fall tomorrow, even if another blizzard arrives next week, the knowledge that seasons turn remains. Winter has an end. It always has. That truth sits quietly unchallenged. You listen to the breathing around you. Steady, deep, no longer tense. Everyone has settled into the long view without discussing it. Survival is no longer just about tonight. It includes tomorrow and the day after that. You imagine the first time the door will open fully again. The sound of snow breaking under boots. The brightness of reflected light. The way cold air will feel different once it carries the promise of change rather than threat. These thoughts do not hurry you. They simply accompany you. The fire hums low and patient. It has learned the rhythm of this winter too. You will tend it many more times before the season turns, but you no longer resent that. Routine has stripped the task of drama. As sleep approaches again, your mind rests on the idea of waiting without strain. The storm may persist. The cabin may creak. Cold may return sharply some nights. None of that erases the certainty that thaw follows freeze. Wrapped in that quiet knowledge, you let go more fully. The future does not need attention right now. It is enough to know it exists. Held by patience learned one night at a time, you drift deeper into rest, carrying the calm understanding that winter is not endless, even when it feels all-consuming. Sleep finally takes on a different quality. It is no longer cautious or light, or interrupted by constant checking. It spreads slowly, confidently, filling the cabin the way warmth does when the fire's been banked just right. You feel it settle into your limbs, easing tension you did not realize you were still holding. The storm outside has not stopped, but it no longer commands your attention. Wind becomes background. Snow becomes weight rather than threat. The cabin has proven itself. So have you. That matters more than any change in weather. You shift once, finding the familiar hollow in the bedding that now fits you perfectly. The straw knows your shape. The blankets fall where you expect them to. Even the small noises feel predictable. A log settling, a breath nearby. A quiet animal movement beyond the wall. Nothing surprises you anymore. People who lived through winters like this spoke of a moment when fear loosened its grip. Not because danger vanished, but because the mind accepted its limits. You cannot control the storm. You can only respond well. Tonight response has become habit. Your breathing deepens. Each inhale feels warmer than the last. Your body no longer flinches at small drops in temperature. It trusts the layers around it. Trust is earned slowly, night by night, and once earned it, allows rest to deepen in ways exhaustion alone cannot. The cabin seems to hum now, a low vibration shared by walls, fire, and sleeping bodies. It is not sound exactly, it is presence. The feeling that everything is doing what it is meant to do, holding, warming, waiting. You think briefly of how many nights like this have been lived by people you will never know. Different storms, different cabins, same quiet endurance. That continuity is comforting. It reminds you that this night is not unique, even if it feels intensely personal. Your thoughts slow, then loosen. Images drift past without grabbing hold. The firelight flickers behind closed eyes. The storm softens into rhythm. Muscles relax fully at last. Sleep settles in completely now, not as an escape, but as a continuation of everything that has worked so far. Rest is part of survival. It repairs what cold and effort wear down. People understood that instinctively, even when conditions made it difficult. You sink into the bed, into warmth layered from many sources: fire, bodies, walls, habit. Knowledge passed quietly through time. All of it holds you without effort. Outside, the blizzard continues its long work. Inside, nothing more is required of you tonight. The night grows slower, now gentler. Words stretch and soften. Thoughts drift without edges. You're safe enough, warm enough, held by a space that has done its job, and will continue to do so until morning arrives in its own time. Breath follows breath. The fire settles deeper into embers. The storm's voice fades into something distant and unimportant. Your body rests fully trusting that everything it needs is already in place. There is nothing to solve, nothing to prepare, nothing to fear in this moment. You let the darkness carry you the way it has carried so many before. Wrapped in quiet warmth and patience, you drift deeper still toward a sleep that does not ask anything of you, except to exist within it. The cabin holds, the night passes, sweet dreams,